Welcome to the 6th Annual Ministry of Finance Planning and Economic Development NTV Economic Summit. My name is Priscilla Regina Naloga. I work with Nation Media Group under NTV Uganda. I'm the host of the Current Affairs show in the morning, 6:30 to 9 a.m., where we get the matters for the day, national, local, you name it, and we translate that information for the end user, who's the citizen of Uganda, so that they can make an informed decision. Our mandate is to have informed news so that they can make informed decisions. And I'm also the host of NTV at 1, which is our inaugural bulletin every single day at NTV. It's an honor to be in your company. This event is being broadcasted live on NTV Uganda and across all our social media platforms, on Twitter, on Facebook, as well as our YouTube channels. So you can type in NTV Uganda and be a part of the discussions. These discussions are going to be extended to our online audiences, and so we request that the hashtag be used, NTV Summit 22, hashtag NTV Summit 22. All protocol observed. Once again, you are most welcome. In this room is great men and women who hold the positions that can transform our economy as Ugandans. And therefore, the theme for us this year is strategies for stabilizing Uganda's economy and realizing sustainable yet inclusive growth amidst the global turbulence and uncertainty. Now, speaking of uncertainties, one of them is COVID-19 that has changed the way we view things and the way we treat things as emergencies and also as solutions. It has opened up our eyes to the potential that we have, but also the unseen gold that we have, not just as a country, but as an entire world. One of them for us here in Uganda is the deployment of technology in every single thing that we do. Technology has caused the businesses, small, medium enterprises, to fly. If it wasn't for COVID-19, they would still be folding their hands in some shop, in some arcade, and suffering with the rent of the owner of that building. That is, in a nutshell. I would like to recognize our partners that have made this 6th Annual Economic Summit possible. If it wasn't for you holding hands together, we wouldn't have been having this summit today. Ministry of Finance Planning and Economic Development, thank you so much. We're grateful that you are alert to what Ugandans are going through, and you're doing every single thing tooth and nail to ensure that there's a stable economy, right down to the wananchi. Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries, and this is where the President of the Republic of Uganda, President Yoweri Museveni, has continuously emphasized that there is gold right there that we can mine and be able to create the sustainable, inclusive growth that we're looking at amidst the global turbulence and uncertain times. Bank of Uganda, thank you so much for creating a safe environment. It may not look safe for us, the decisions may not be good for us in present time, but they're there to protect the future and the economy of Uganda. Standard Chartered Bank, thank you so much for your contribution to ensuring that the economy is supported right to the last person. Uganda Development Corporation, we also do recognize your support on this journey, and you too have deployed strategies that have created some sort of stability that we want to learn from this afternoon. UAP Financial Services, Uganda Limited, Old Mutual, thank you so much for creating a backbone of assurance through insurance. Uganda Development Bank, we also do recognize that you've continuously put in place initiatives or been the embedment of initiatives from government so that Ugandans can benefit from them. Post Bank Uganda, we also do recognize your presence in the room this afternoon. Thank you so much for walking the mile with us on the 6th Annual Ministry of Finance Planning, Economic Development, NTV Economic Summit. Now, allow me to walk you through the agenda of the afternoon so that we can be able to move along together. We're going to be receiving welcoming remarks from the General Manager of the NTV Uganda, Mr. Johnson Omolo, and thereafter we'll be receiving a keynote address from the Permanent Secretary, as well as Secretary to the Treasury from the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. That will be followed by an address from our expected chief guest, the Deputy Speaker of the Republic of Uganda, Mr. Thomas Tayewa. And then we'll be having a panel discussion that will be moderated by the economist who traces it down to the unborn baby of tomorrow, Dr. Fred Muhumuza. And thereafter we'll be having your reactions on the floor, forging a way on strategies for stabilizing Uganda's economy and realizing the sustainable, inclusive growth amidst global turbulence and uncertainties. Again, our online audience, you are most welcome, and you can follow through with the hashtag NTV Summit 22, NTV Summit 22, across our social media platforms. And in the house, you can share that link to the rest of the members of the companies, corporations, and entities that you represent this afternoon so that they can be a part of the conversation. Without further ado, allow me invite Mr. Johnson Omolo, the General Manager for NTV, to give us a welcoming remark.
The Acting Governor, Bank of Uganda, Dr. Tingo Ego, the Permanent Secretary, Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, Dr. Ramadan Gobi, Resident Representative of the IMF, Your Excellency Ambassador Amin Mauji, representing AKDN in Uganda, distinguished guests, all sponsors present, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor to welcome you to the 6th annual NTV Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development Economic Summit. We have walked this journey together with the ministry for the last 5 years. We remain grateful to the ministry in the work they do to better Uganda's economy amidst the global and regional turbulence that we continue to experience as a country. The world is faced with uncertainties, including unilateralism, the war in Europe between the friendly brothers, disruptions from emerging technologies, insecurity in the region that affects our balance of trade, sluggish economic growth, the debt burden, and the slow domestic mobilization that we continue to experience as a country. Not only does Uganda need to recover its economy to the pre-COVID-19 trend, but to grow even faster to address pre-existing challenges like rapid population growth and associated increasing demand for services, vulnerability, jobless growth, and a sluggish socio-economic transformation. We remain confident that today's deliberation will generate ideas that will go into policy adjustments to stabilize our economy. We encourage all leaders and all citizens to embrace the parish development model that is being rolled out from government with an aim of liberating households from poverty to lead a better quality of life and stimulate productivity in the economy. With those few words, I would like to welcome you all once again. As a private sector player, we also feel the challenges in the economy. We hope that the debt issue will be looked into, and we'll hear more about our debt and other areas ailing our economy. Without wasting much time, I would like to welcome you all to receive the message from our chief guest, who is in Juba on official duties, but has spared time to speak to us and the country at large. I thank you.
Thank you. I hope I'm being heard properly. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry this has found me on the road. I'm in Juba, and one of the things I'm handling is to do with our economy, traders. I'm glad that indeed NTV, working with the Ministry of Finance, is holding this summit, which always enables us as Parliament, as legislators, to pick out very critical indicators in terms of transforming our economy, and which guide us, especially now that we are coming. The issue of sustainability of any economy is now the most pressing across the globe. But I'm really glad that Uganda, we've managed to have a resilient economy, an economy that has managed to withstand the shocks that we've seen all over the world, an economy whereby our currency has not crashed. If we've had inflation, it has not gone through the roof, and I give kudos to the people at Ministry of Finance, at Bank of Uganda, and the whole business community that has continued to support us as a country. Because when you look at the various socio-economic and geopolitical challenges we faced, COVID, it has hit us, but the economy has come out. We've had Ebola, we are still resilient. This is very, very important and for our country. And I believe we can continue achieving that. When you look at how our banks are performing, the liquidity within our banks and how much they are able to lend, then you really feel strong and in the economy of our country. As a legislature, we have supported government in several ways, and we are going to continue doing that, especially on issues of taxes, where government said because of the COVID situation, we are not going to be increasing taxes. And indeed, we came in, we looked at the various revenue source mobilization strategies of government, and we continue to support government around that. So we are focusing on holding government accountable, especially to remain within the provisions of the Charter for Fiscal Responsibility, ensuring that indeed the targets that were set for borrowing, the targets that were set for inflation, controlling inflation, and all the rest of the major economic indicators remain of the Charter for Fiscal Responsibility. Recently, of course, we had the borrowings where I saw very many Ugandans raising issues here and there. But the major issue is that these were identified as revenue sources during the budgeting process. Otherwise, it would have made that we just passed a budget of 47 the limits of the Charter for Fiscal Responsibility, and also is sustainable. I have seen some of the credit rating agencies trying to downgrade our credit rating as a country, but from our assessments as a parliament, as a legislature, our debt is still very sustainable, and we are working closely. We have all the kind of experts needed to look at that, but that we are within what is manageable in terms of financing the debt of the country. Now, our next focus is going to be mainly on supporting the business sector. We've done that by putting more money in Uganda Development Bank, working with government. The issue has been the condition is set for accessing these funds, and we have engaged in flexible. They have also opened up to medium and small scale companies. We are pushing them hard, and I can see positive signs from UDB, ensure that indeed we have several financing schemes for several businesses so that we can support our economy, and especially the small businesses. Now, the next focus should be on cottage industry, like India. You know, I was reading that India, I think nearly 66% the economy was based on cottage industry. That's where we should focus on our money. We focus our money on giving more skills to our people so that they can be more productive. We have a challenge of the human resource capital in the country. In terms of human resource, so that you appoint a Ugandan because their character is based on this and they are able to do ABCD. We are also looking at non-tariff barriers, especially within the East African community. As a parliament, we are trying to see how best we can work with government to remove all these non-tariff barriers. That's why recently we engaged the executive so much when they were putting permits on coffee, on Tanzania. We are very sure that indeed we need to support Bubu, but you can only support Bubu if you have already a well-developed local production sector. If you do it when the local production is not sufficient, is not ready, and you put a lot of taxes on imports, then you're going to be falling into problems. Of course, the strategy of import substitution, we are looking at government strategies for import substitution by putting more taxes on imported products so that our local products can compete, but also designing deliberate processes to ensure that indeed local companies can be given preference when it comes to procurements for the construction and all that. And finally, appealing to Ugandans that let's be a country, let's support each other. We are a very secure country. We are a country where we are looking at laws and streamlining all our systems. Recently, we saw how Parliament worked overnight and passed around 7 bills so that we can address challenges that had come with putting Uganda on the rail. Within the country. So we shall continue supporting. The legislature is open. We've started the budgeting process. We are watching all your submissions in most of these for us through our research departments, through our monitoring and evaluation departments, to ensure that indeed we do capture the minds of Ugandans on several aspects, especially to do with the resilience of our economy. With our support to the import substitution strategy of the government, with the support to Bubu, we believe Uganda is destined for much better, resilient economy that is even more sustainable. I thank you.
A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for the Deputy Speaker of the Republic of Uganda. Thank you so much, Honorable Tayewa Thomas, for your time and commitment to ensuring that our economy is stabilized in the shortest time possible. He has made a remark to the fact that the currency has not yet crashed, which I think we should applaud. Inflation has not gone through the roof yet. I'm not sure if that's first floor or second floor or third floor. Focusing on making our money more productive within the country, but also within the region. Those are some of the highlights from his address to us this afternoon as we go on. Once again, you're most welcome to the annual Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, NTV Economic Summit. As we go on, I'm privileged to have the honor of inviting a man that is tried, tested, and proven it, and now has the privilege of implementing it, a disciple of economics that works. And also, he is the permanent secretary and secretary to the Treasury. Ladies and gentlemen, from the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, let's welcome Mr. Ramadan Gowi.
Thank you very much. The Right Honorable Deputy Speaker of the Parliament
Recording stopped.
of Uganda. I could see Professor Ephraim Kamuntu, who is a senior presidential advisor in charge of manifesto implementation, and a member of the cabinet, the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Uganda, all the senior government officials, the business executives. I see the room is full of them. And all the people of Uganda. I'm glad to be here to talk about the economy of Uganda. And I will start my remarks by giving you an update on where we are coming from and where we are. Although we are facing a number of global, regional, as well as domestic shocks, Uganda's economy continues to be resilient and is in a stable state. From COVID-19 pandemic to the Russia-Ukraine war, to the high global inflation, the high global interest rates, resulting in increased borrowing costs, severe tightening of financial markets. My officers were checking this morning. They told me that the LIBOR is now at 5.2%, benchmark policy rate, while Euribor is at about 2.4%. The latter was actually negative at the beginning of this year, now at 2.4. To climate change effects, resulting in floods and prolonged droughts, increased tendency for protectionist policies and non-tariff barriers in the region, slowdown in China and the Euro area, and now the Ebola epidemic. All of that has happened in the last 3 years. But despite these different shocks, which have brought a diversity, we are still a very solid and resilient economy. To us who are in the business of managing the environment that affects people's economic welfare, this has been a time of responding to multiple shocks with limited fiscal space and complex trade-offs. It has been like getting out of ICU and then getting knocked first by a truck, that's COVID-19, then by a Land Cruiser, that is inflation, and finally by a border tightening of financial markets. Luckily, we are still here, we are alive, and importantly, we know where we are going. Uganda's economy has been very resilient and continues on its recovery path. This is not by good luck. It is on account of good economic management in the past, today, and in the future. The government has had to make a very difficult policy trade-offs. Number one, promoting growth versus containing supply-side inflation. Should we promote growth or should we first arrest inflation? That's a trade-off we had to make. Number two, fiscal support versus debt sustainability, allowing more pass-through effect of the international prices to the domestic prices. And number three, credit growth versus financial stability risk, particularly increased non-performing loans. We had to make that trade-off. The results of making sound economic policy are quite numerous. First, I will comment on economic growth. Although projections have been revised downwards from 6% to 5.3% this fiscal year, it remains quite high compared to the global and regional growth forecasts. The global growth is forecast to slow from 6% in 2021 to 3.2% in 2022 and to 2.7% in 2023. Sub-Saharan Africa GDP growth is projected to slow down from 4.7% in 2021 to 3.6% in 22 and to 3.7% in 2023. This is due to global inflation and the tightening of the global financial conditions, in addition to a series of other economic shocks. So, compared to the region and international figures, when we project the domestic growth of Uganda, the GDP growth, at 5.3%, we are still in a very good shape. This growth is mainly projected to come from increased government incentives or initiatives to the private sector, as well as the different interventions government is making and planning to make, including the parish development model, the investment in oil and gas sector, the growth in regional trade, but most importantly, our main bet is on the support to the private sector, because it's the engine of Uganda's growth and recovery. That's why our policy mix is designed primarily to support the private sector recovery, including putting a moratorium on new taxes. We haven't introduced new taxes. And also, we haven't raised the current tax rates. We have also reduced domestic borrowing, and we are going to continue monitoring and reduce it further, as well as the several budget-supported interventions, that some of which I've mentioned, many others you know already those interventions, and others are coming. The drop in global crude oil prices has also translated into a reduction in the annual inflation for energy, fuels, and utilities. Monthly inflation for energy, fuels, and utilities dropped from a peak of 3.5% in June this year to negative 2.3% in October this year. And we expect it to reduce further. Tax administration has also improved and will continue to improve. This last period, since the beginning of the financial year, July to October 2022, saw URA collecting a surplus of 142.9 billion shillings compared to the target that we had given them. This has come as a result of improved tax administration, closing the gaps in compliance, because there is no much room for increasing rates and so on. So it has been mainly in getting those who are supposed to pay tax to pay. We only tax those who have made money. We don't tax anyone who's not making money. This growth is equivalent to an annual nominal growth of revenue of 17.4% compared to the collections in the same period last financial year. The current projections indicate that revenue to GDP ratio for this financial year, 2022-23, will be about 14%. When I turn to export receipts, these have also improved. Merchandise exports, export receipts increased from $3.029 billion, about 11.3 trillion shillings, in 2020-21 to US dollars $3.836 billion. That's about 14.4 trillion shillings in 2021-2022. In particular, coffee receipts, the money we have earned from coffee exports has increased from $555 million, that's about 2 trillion shillings in 2020-21, to $862 million, about 3.2 trillion shillings in last year. Non-coffee exports, excluding gold, increased from $2.1 billion to $2.5 billion during the same period. So we have seen improvement in exports across board. When I turn to foreign direct investment, this has rebounded to $1.22 billion for the financial year ending June 2022, compared to $920 million in the 12 months before 2022. This is mainly in the area of oil and gas and the minerals sector. They have been the key drivers of this growth in FDI. Our international reserves remain adequate, about 4 months of future import cover, and we are monitoring them very well, as the Deputy Governor will tell you. The Uganda shilling appreciated by 0.1% against the US dollar in October, a slight appreciation, trading at an average rate of 3,822 per dollar compared to 3,825 in September. It has since even performed much better, as Bank of Uganda will report. Now I turn to the short-term interventions to strengthen economic resilience and mitigate global and domestic shocks. I will start with fiscal consolidation. Here, we are doing 4 main things. Number one is in the area of managing the domestic revenue mobilization, ensuring that we implement our domestic revenue mobilization strategy. That strategy, which was authored a few years ago, a couple of years ago, now we are effectively implementing it. Improving tax administration, including digitization, by introducing digital stamps and electronic receipting system to reduce tax leakage. Also, we have embarked on a tax expenditure rationalization effort. Here we are focused on reducing the leakage of revenue through tax expenditures, tax exemptions. And we are mainly focusing on putting in place a credible criteria for determining the beneficiaries and also monitoring those exemptions. We are also carrying out a cost-benefit analysis of the tax expenditures or the tax exemptions to ensure that what the beneficiaries promise, they deliver on them. We are putting in place sunset clauses in our tax exemptions such that the beneficiaries get to know that these exemptions are not perpetual, and they will be monitored. When you don't perform, we stop there. But also in ensuring that we monitor effectively these exemptions. So we are working with our partners, development partners, and other ministries, departments, and agencies to implement this plan, which we have agreed on. And we have agreed on it as government. But I want to make it clear, a rationalization plan does not mean phasing out exemptions. No. The exemptions or the tax incentives will still form part of our investment incentive framework, only that now we shall be monitoring them a little bit more effectively than we've been doing. We are also, under the medium term, within our fiscal consolidation, working to reduce government domestic borrowing so that we can support the private sector. As I already indicated, and I'm going to expound on that, we are also scaling down government expenditure, especially on activities that do not enhance growth and instead prioritize more export sectors and import substitution. We are also working to reduce supplementary expenditures in the budget, which have been a major cause of unplanned domestic borrowing, to be restricted to the legal 3% under the law, and themselves being for those activities which were unforeseen, unavoidable, and most importantly, some of them in the area of industrial policy to support the economy. We are also ensuring close monetary and fiscal policy coordination to re-establish macroeconomic stability, especially curbing the rising inflation. I would like Ugandans to know that policy credibility ascends from close policy coordination and also in avoiding populist policies, ensuring that what government does is the right thing. We have stuck on this, working closely with the central bank. The central bank, when inflation increased, they increased the policy rate, the central bank rate. And government of Uganda, this one, they increased it quite fast, from about 6.5% in April to 10% in October this year. Within that short space, the CBR jumped with all those basis points. On our side, on the fiscal side, in Q1 of this financial year, beginning July, we released only 18% of the budget, compared to about 25% that the ministries, departments, and agencies of government of Uganda expected. This was largely to support the Bank of Uganda efforts to fight inflation, but also to avoid borrowing at a wrong time. Domestic borrowing at the time when BOU was raising interest rates would have crowded out the private sector, as interest rates would have risen sharply. So when we took a decision to reduce the release so that we release the cash that we have, mainly the money collected by URA, it actually worked because it supported the stability of the domestic market, and the private sector was hit by the shocks, but not including the shock of government borrowing. We have also been supporting economic growth, especially the private sector during the pandemic, by keeping the economy open and also preserving jobs through a series of policies, both monetary and fiscal. Bank of Uganda credit relief measures, they helped in having the private sector restructuring their credit, their loans with the financial institutions. On our side, the tax reliefs, and we are now working on how to support further the private sector by looking into the tax penalties, especially on SMEs. Those which we can waive, we shall waive them. On improving government expenditure efficiency, we are rationalizing the money-consuming government agencies, authorities, and even parastatals. That conversation has now gone to Parliament, Very soon it will be debated, cabinet finalized the analysis, and we are looking at how do we make the government more efficient. We are also improving public investment management to ensure value for money and positive returns on investment by government in our projects. We have revamped the entire PIMS for projects. No project will enter the budget again when it's not fully studied, and studied for economic, what we call economic appraisal, not just the financials. How, in other words, how is it going to contribute to the growth of the economy and the welfare of Ugandans? We are also focusing on growth-enhancing activities and ensuring adequate funding on the maintenance of our road infrastructure going forward. As you can see, our roads, we have opened up a lot of tarmac, but the old roads have decayed. So we are going to put more emphasis now on maintenance, and we are putting in the money very soon. Supporting business development services, including implementation of digitization and e-government, will also help in reviving our economy. And on government side, we have digitized most of the government systems. In the government now, we pay electronically. Money paid electronically is more traceable. There is an audit trail on it. And we hope this will help in improving the governance. We are also digitizing procurement. We have already enrolled a number of ministries, departments, and agencies, and by the end of this financial year, we shall have nearly 100 of them on electronic government procurement, where people will procure now as if they are on a WhatsApp group. You know, in a WhatsApp group, there is total transparency. As you are typing, all members are seeing that you are typing. When you delete, it remains there, rather than as deleted. And the members ask, what have you deleted? So we want now procurement to be also carried out in that format. It will enhance transparency and reduce on the corruption. We are also digitizing our payroll. The human capital management system is now in place, and it has already started to bite by identifying ghost workers where they have persisted. These days you hear a number of people telling you that, especially in local governments, our salary, there is something which has been going on in the area of the payroll. The government of Uganda has enough money to pay everybody that they legally recruited. It has the first call on our budget. It's a statutory obligation of government. But now to hear some people saying we haven't been paid on time, okay, we had some issues of the system at the beginning. Going forward, it will be the responsibility of every single accounting officer to account for every coin given to them to pay the people that are employed under them. And that system is already identifying some ghost teachers, even ghost schools. Imagine, the entire school is a ghost. All of these are going to be identified by the digitization effort. On ensuring debt sustainability, I know, fellow Ugandans, we love one major debate, the debt level of our country, on whether our debt is sustainable, and so on and so forth. I see a lot of headlines and debates, both in the formal media and the social media. I want to let you know that Uganda has a target which is enshrined in our Charter for Fiscal Responsibility to keep our public debt to GDP ratio within the threshold of 50%. It's very well planned and calibrated. Whereas our public debt to GDP ratio is currently at 48.6% as of June 2022, debt service cost has, however, risen, raising concerns, especially in terms of the liquidity ratios needed to service this debt, which is projected at 33.2% of the revenue we collect, the domestic revenue for this year. That's what we project, that it will go to about 33.2%. We are mindful of this, and we have a very good plan of managing it within the levels that are sustainable. As I always say, the first major tenet of debt sustainability is transparency, ensuring that debt numbers are given to those who are supposed to know them, and those are the people of Uganda. We give you all of these numbers, but still there are those who say, are you really telling the truth? Is that the debt? For us, we think it is more than that. Please, in the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, we don't have any stronger rooms for keeping anything. All of the numbers are on the table. And I want to tell you that we are very mindful on keeping the debt of Uganda sustainable, and we are doing this by prioritizing borrowing at concessional and near concessional terms wherever it is available, reducing domestic borrowing and substitute part of it with the cheaper external borrowing, and we have started on that. And due to high interest rates at which banks are offering to lend us money, we have deliberately declined that money in the first quarter of this financial year. We haven't borrowed money from banks which Ugandans cannot afford to pay back. That's why we took a hard decision to instead reduce the money that we release to government institutions. We basically borrowed for debt redemption, but not for NDF. We took very little money on the NDF side, and we shall continue to monitor and ensure that this is done. Now, instead, we are in the process now of borrowing about 500 million euros to replace about 2 trillion shillings, which had been planned for domestic borrowing. The cost of servicing this external loan will be half compared to when we borrow this money domestically. Actually, the fiscal savings from this decision alone is estimated at Uganda shillings 2 trillion over the next 10 years. So we are going to save Ugandans the burden of paying about 2 trillion shillings they would have paid if we borrowed the highly priced money domestically. And at the same time, we shall be able to give Bank of Uganda some reserves and also ensure that this money is mainly invested in export-oriented activities so that we are able to earn foreign exchange to service the debt quite more comfortably in the medium term. We are also ensuring that the funding available in the climate financing window intended to finance green investments and boosting climate change adaptation is tapped. We are accelerating regional trade and integration to boost exports. We are deepening financial inclusion to boost domestic savings as well as the financial sector. As I conclude, the next budget, ladies and gentlemen, for 2023-24 is going to be a budget which is fully aligned with the program-based plan and budgeting principles. We have revised the plan, the NDP3, to fit into the new realities, which I started with. The COVID-19, the inflation, the interest rates which are high, meaning higher borrowing costs, and so on and so forth. Priority in this budget is going to be focused on revamping and expanding our railway transport. We are also going to focus on electricity transmission and distribution. We are going to focus on irrigation, particularly solar-powered small-scale irrigation, and we are also going to focus on supporting private sector development by ensuring that we increase the access to low-cost capital and also by investing now more practically in business development services. But all in all, by ensuring that human capital development still leads the way. Human capital development has the largest call on our budget. In the current budget, it's at 29%, and we want to keep it as the #1 priority because it invests in people. In conclusion, the remarkable fact is not how much government does to control economic activity, but how much it does not to do that. One economist called Arthur Lewis said the secret to development is good government, adequate rainfall, and a reasonable secondary education system. Our grandfather of economics, Adam Smith, for him attributes it to peace, good taxes, and a tolerable administration of justice. All of the rest being about or being brought by the natural course of things. In other words, as government, we shall continue to provide the fundamentals, the peace and stability, the environment in which the private sector can flourish with an efficient, equitable, and good tax system and a tolerable administration of justice. All the rest being left to nature. We're a religious country. God is with us. And I want to assure you that Ugandan economy will remain very resilient. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Permanent Secretary, for those remarks. One of the things that he has mentioned is focusing on the private sector, resuscitating what they do. He has also talked about the growth opportunities that Uganda has in oil and gas, as well as the mineral sector. And he has made mention of one of the strategies that government, especially the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, they are going to be adopting digitalization so that they can be able to trace every single movement concerning finances and funding of Uganda's budget. So thank you so much, Mr. Ramadan Gobi, for that. Now, I would like to pick a reaction from the Private Sector Foundation representing this afternoon. And I believe that there's a microphone in front of the chairman, Mr. Humphrey Nzei. With what has been submitted, what are your reactions and also expectations out of this summit?
Permanent Secretary of the Treasury. Thank you very much for your submission. I'll tell you a bit about PSFU first. Private Sector Foundation was started 7 years ago, and we represent, we are the ethics body of the private sector in Uganda. We are sector-based, so we're made up of 13 different sectors, and we represent all of business, from MSMEs up to manufacturing. So we're hopefully representative of all of business. We are made up, our roles are really two. We advocate for the private sector with government, so we walk lockstep with government in a lot of things. We discuss with them and we advocate on behalf of private sector with government. The other part of our engagement is in projects. We have about $283 million worth of projects under management in Private Sector Foundation, and those projects are really around skilling, training, and creating jobs. We've created so far, with Young Africa Works, we aim to create about 300,000 jobs over the next few years. With our recent project SDF, we have trained over 100,000 Ugandans directly and about 800,000 indirectly. So we're doing a lot to push business and this economy forward. We're very excited about this forum because it brings to the fore a lot of things that we're very concerned about, and I'm happy to hear especially what the PSST had to say in terms of the measures he's put in place to grow this economy. I'd like to probably touch on 3 areas where PSFU are particularly concerned. The first area is electricity, which he did touch on. Uganda is one of the few countries that we actually do have excess electricity, which is a great thing, but now we have to focus on distribution and the quality of electricity. Our manufacturers need better quality electricity, and also we need access to 3-phase power in rural areas so that we can have agro-industries in rural areas and be able to have that affected. The second area is on transport. I'm very happy that he spoke about the railway. That is something that we really need revived. Both the standard gauge railway and the old meter gauge railway. Doing that will bring down the cost of transport from the sea from about $129 per ton currently to around between $40 and $60. Now, that is a huge effect on our marketability and our competitiveness as business. That'll bring the cost of transport. In some cases, transport accounts for up to 45% of the cost of goods in Uganda, whereas really it should be around the 10% mark. So that's the second area we really want you to focus on. The third area is on the cost of finance. We're happy with the fact that government has invested 1.5 trillion shillings into Uganda Development Bank. What we need now is easier access to that financing. And I know that the Deputy Speaker spoke about that, and I'm glad that he raised the point that we need easier access to that financing. Development financing should have different criteria from commercial bank financing. So those are the three areas really that PSFU would like to push government on, and we're glad that they're making strides already in that area, but we'd like our members to see the benefits of that. So I'm glad that this summit is taking place, and I'm glad that we are able to engage and share at least the issues of private sector with the government, as we always have. And I'd like to thank government for always listening to private sector, because I know that in every budget that comes up, we have an input. And I think the last budget, about 64% of what we suggested actually ended up in the budget. So we do have a government that listens. We do have a government that we're walking lockstep with, and we're making great strides in this economy. So we have faith in the economy, and we see that the years ahead are going to be prosperous years for this country, but we have to prepare ourselves, and we have to mitigate against the conditions currently to get to where we need to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hamfrenze, and I know that he speaks for many with the expectations that he has presented for private sector, highlighting on the cost of financing and also transport, but electricity. And I would really emphasize on electricity. In the last 7 days, Uganda as a country has experienced load shedding, even with the excess power that we have. I'll leave that as a food for thought. For our online audience, once again, thank you so much for joining us live on NTV Uganda for the 6th Annual Ministry of Finance Planning and Economic Development NTV Economic Summit. We are going to be looking at different conversations. We're going to be having a moderation and a panel that are going to shape for us the theme: strategies for stabilizing Uganda's economy and realizing sustainable, inclusive growth amidst the global turbulence and the uncertainties. And with that, I would also like to mention our partners that have made the 6th Annual Economic Summit possible. Ministry of Finance Planning and Economic Development, thank you so much for listening always. We do have the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries, Bank of Uganda, we recognize your presence in the room, Standard Chartered Bank, Uganda Development Corporation, UAP Financial Services, Uganda Limited, Uganda Development Bank, and also Post Bank Uganda. Thank you so much for your partnership and making this possible. Next on our agenda, we do have a panel presentation that is going to be moderated by Dr. Fred Muhumuza. And as Dr. Fred Muhumuza joins me on the podium on social media, the hashtag to use is hashtag NTV Summit 22. I would like to pick a tweet that has been posted by a member in this room, Sarah Kajingo, who has said, although we're facing a number of domestic and global shocks from Ukraine-Russia war and climate change effects to the Ebola epidemic, hashtag Uganda's economy remains solid and resilient. This is not by good luck, but by good economic management. Thank you so much, Sarah. Hashtag NTV Summit 22. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Fred Muhumuza.
Thank you, Priscilla. I was about to ask you, we could do better. Priscilla has done a good job to steer us this far. And you have also done a good job to come, and I hope you have earned a cup of tea. You just need to raise your hand. We are the Serena standards, so the tea will come to you. But if you really must walk, and you may want to walk, you can walk and pick a cup of tea out there. Fred Muhumza is my name, as I've been introduced. We want again to go around and thank everybody here. There is only one, I don't know whether to call them sponsor, facilitator, part of the team partnership that hasn't been duly introduced, is the Makerere University Business School Economics Forum. That is where I sit, and the reason I am sitting there is that is where the current PSST was sitting. Now, I'm not predicting anything. I'm going to remain there because somebody has got to remain in the kitchen to make sure things are served. Professor Kamuntu, it's good to see you. Honorable Mary Achambade, you're welcome. I could have gone around and talk all about you, but let me invite a panel that's going to help us to crunch the numbers here. The theme was very, very well calculated, and part of the panel's assignment is to go through the theme, and they will choose any word or any set of words that they see in that theme. So when they come, expect them to do that for us at the beginning and throughout the presentation. As you can see, we are saying strategies to stabilize. But before you stabilize, where did we get the instability from? Does anybody remember? Because you can actually stabilize and you go back to where the instability came from. So we'll be discussing where the instability actually came from. It's not something that we can just say COVID. The world has been unstable since around 2008. There was that global financial shock that became an economic shock. We have not stabilized it since. A number of countries have pumped in trillions of dollars to stabilize their economies. They are still unstable. So it's not about money that stabilizes, it's about policies. What set of policies do you do? It's not about short term, it can be long term. And we shall be discussing some of those things, because the imported inflation is really because of those guys trying to stabilize what could not be stabilized, or maybe using wrong stabilization measures. That's a conversation we are going to have. And we don't just want to stabilize. We want to stabilize and then we can restart the growth. The figures the PSST has mentioned are still not for the Ugandan population that is increasing at almost 3% per annum. So how do we get to double-digit growth? Sustainably. You don't want to bump there and bump back. And how can you make that inclusive? Growth should not be only for a few who are tall, or those who are short, or those who are light-skinned. How do you make it inclusive? COVID taught us one thing: COVID anywhere is COVID everywhere. And COVID, by the way, is still available. If you're reading the news, China is demonstrating, not because of missiles, it's COVID. We don't want to bring the instability here. I hope people have been vaccinated, because COVID is still amidst us. So all these are potential areas of instability, even as we discuss the stabilization. So we want to have that inclusive growth. And remember, the global turbulence is still with us. We still have a lot of uncertainties. These things are yet to go. The war in Ukraine is still there and still influences my cooking oil. It still influences the fuel. We don't know where the fuel prices are going. They have reduced our cost. They have moderated our inflation. But this is something we are not in charge of. And the guys in charge of it haven't actually agreed on a table. We still need another 10 million barrels of oil per day pumped out to go back to stable prices. Those guys are yet to have that conversation. Many of us have Chinese phones. ZTE is a Chinese company that does a lot of electronics. America has said stop selling things to America. Now, if that company becomes unstable, that instability will come to us who buy those phones. Because they don't make money out of our 20,000 phones we buy per month, or possibly even per year. So there is still a lot of uncertainty, even as we work out our measures. So we want to have this conversation, speak to what has been happening, what is happening, how do we get the future that we all need. Dr. Sarah Birete, why don't you come and join me on the panel here? I'm inviting the lady first, the only lady on this panel. Not that that is the only lady I could find. There were many out there. So I'm giving her the free range to find where to sit. The men will surround her or be on her side. She takes the podium first. Mr. Kaboyo, why don't you join this podium? They will tell you where they are and where they are coming from and why they are here. Mr. Kaketo. Mr. Sega, I hope that is still the name. Me and him used to eat posho with beans and some stones in them. And we asked the dean of students way back in time, why don't you provide the beans and the stones alone so that we can find our right quantities? Because the stones were guaranteed. But that's where we have come from. Mr. Jemba Kanakulia, Kasita. Kasita is Kasita, Uganda these days. It's no longer Kampala City Traders. It's Kasita, Uganda. So feel free to speak the issues in Gulu and speak about the issues in Mbale. I'm told the inflation was highest in Arua. So the people from Arua may be feeling the pinch a little bit more than us in Kampala. But also in Kampala we segregate. We say high income, middle income, low income. And quite often inflation is higher in one of those groups. So we all are not in the same basket. But how do we make sure everybody is surviving with us? And again, in the way they came, I want to start with Dr. Bireti to really speak to the theme. Now, I know it's dangerous when the deputy governor is in the house to give a blank check. You can cause inflation by the figure you put there. But he has all the measures to take care of that. So I can gladly say, I've given you a blank check. Speak to the theme for about 3 to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, our moderator, the Acting Governor, Bank of Uganda, our keynote speaker, distinguished guests in your respective capacities, all protocol observed. I come from the governance sector, and my bias to the theme will be mainly rooted in governance aspects. If you look at the current economic shocks globally, I think we would all agree that the countries that have managed to keep more stable are those that have prudent macroeconomic management, strong governance, and strong institutions. The issue of good governance and transparency matters most in economics and goes beyond the issue of wasted resources. It's about erosion of a social contract and the corrosion of the government's ability to grow the economy in a way that benefits citizens. In Uganda's case, our challenges go beyond COVID, the global turbulence and uncertainty. We have internal crises like what I would like to refer to as the corruption and mismanagement pandemic. So before COVID, how was our economy being governed? What was the status of the institutions that are supposed to ensure that we have a stable and sustainable economy in this country? The adoption of the global crises has only made the need for good governance extremely urgent, and countries with strong institutions will respond better and build resilient economies ahead of these crises. I would like to start from the issue of debt sustainability, debt management, especially considering that we are almost at a 50% level of our GDP. We have increasing public expenditures, increasing borrowing against unknown GDP because GDP is not fixed. And this creates fixed debt obligations for us as a country. The PSST did talk about increasing imports. in order to create a balance, a fiscal balance, because our increasing exports, because our imports are still bigger than our exports. But how do we do this if every day we see money, there's less money borrowed that goes into productivity? If we don't improve citizens' productivity in a deliberate manner, how do we grow exports? If we don't cut down our public expenditure, for example, and budget priorities, because if you take a quick scan through the budget, you look at our expenditures, yes, 29% goes to human development, human capital development, but how about the other costs? What is the cost of our public administration? The number of MPs, that is about 556 MPs. We have 180 local authorities, that's districts and municipalities. We have 81 cabinet ministers. We have more than 122 presidential advisors. We have several MDs that we are trying to rationalize. And all this cost, most of this money is borrowed. A quick look at the budget, revenue versus expenditure. Our domestic revenue is estimated at 21 trillion, although we are happy that some excesses, surpluses have been realized. And our debt financing only is 18 trillion. Just by simple mathematics, the money we collect and the money we spend in debt financing, before any other expenditure, we remain with 3 trillion as a country before borrowing. Out of that 3 trillion, our security alone is 7 trillion. So we cannot even secure the country without borrowing. And every other day we increase our debt burden as a country. The danger with debt is that if we don't increase productivity, many of the loans are likely to mature in the 3 to 5 years, and they are likely to deplete our reserves if nothing strategic is done to cut down our public administration and increase productivity of the people. So how sustainable is this? How realistic is this as a country? My second point would be on the execution of government programs. The PSST did talk about parish development model, electricity and roads. The parish development model had a budget of 1.059 trillion for each of the parishes to get 100 million. We have so far disbursed about 25 million, assuming that we have all the structures and committees in place. How shall we ensure that the parish development model works effectively to increase the value and productivity of the people at the grassroots levels and revitalize the economy with the piecemeal disbursements of money? If you go again to the issue of the governance challenges with similar models like parish development model, recently it has been reported that government has failed to recover 129 billion from the Youth Livelihood Fund. And we know that similar schemes equally failed to recover money. And that's the same approach we are using for the parish development model. Are we certain this time that giving money to the people alone without addressing the structural challenges of the people will solve the economic aspects of the people or the economic problems and make sure there is value for money, there is productivity and inclusivity in the financial economy? We need to, as a country, look at the gap left by the cooperative movement and the benefits accrued from there for the agricultural value chain. How are we covering those gaps as a country? Because its records show that in the times when we had the cooperative movement as a country, we had more exports, agricultural exports, compared to the population then. I know that normally we want to project growth without indicating the other aspects of growth then, like the number of population at that time and the levels of GDP. So if you compare the benefits that citizens were deriving from the cooperative movement, I know that there's an argument that SACCOs are a replacement of cooperatives, but we know that the two are completely different from each other, and SACCOs do not derive the agricultural value chain benefits in a manner that cooperatives were doing for the country. And as I go towards the conclusion, Mr. Moderator, we have a challenge of increasing population in this country and the youth budge. Most of these plans that we talk about, save for one program, are normally concentrated on the 22% of the population, with total closed eyes about the 78% of Uganda's population, and the youth budge that need apprenticeship and pathways to development and systematic training, and cannot develop by mere handouts. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarah Birete, speaking and raising issues which really resonate with the concerns that PSST raised, issues of governance, issues of making sure you are getting value for money. He told us there are no safe rooms in Ministry of Finance where data or information is hidden, but looks like elsewhere we need to extend that kind of practice. Can we know who is doing what? From economics, sometimes there is a terminology we say, was it a dead weight loss? Before we recover the money from those who failed to pay, I want to go and find out what did they do with the money. There might be some economic benefit out of that, in which case, like we do in banking, you write it off as a bad loan. You don't go for recovery because it actually did something that is economically useful. But that's not the strategy. PDM must not be treated like that. She's talked about cooperatives, and I want to swing to the extreme left. My OB, Mr. Sega, works with the Minister of Agriculture, and you can tell some people a few other things about that. There are protocols in government that I don't follow very well. But what is it for you in the theme? We're talking about inclusive growth. We're talking about sustainable growth. A lot of uncertainties and resilience really built within the agricultural sector. From where you sit, I don't want to bias you. Please speak to the theme.
Thank you very much, and I want to join everybody here to welcome the participants, and I want to recognize the Secretary to Treasury and thank him so much for the presentation he has made. I will observe the protocol and allow me to go straight to the point. First, you have put me in a very awkward position, and I thought as my OB maybe you will save me. It is procedurally difficult for me to discuss the presentation of the Secretary of Treasury, who has given a government-wide strategy. However, I will contribute to that strategy and basically how the agriculture sector is going to, or is positioned to support the government-wide strategy that the Secretary of Treasury has told the Ugandans. One, agriculture is a value chain. That's a starting point. And everybody has a role to play. Just from the garden to the plate or to the market in Europe, which we are looking for. Everybody has a role to play. And there's no single player that cuts across all the entire value chain. Therefore, the ministry and the government agreed on what should be the role of the ministry to support these government interventions, summarized in two categories. One, to support export promotion. And two, to support the strategy of government to increase the household incomes. And that is now the PDM. And the ministry came up with the 5 strategies which were discussed in government and the stakeholders, and these were accepted as the strategies that can help to achieve this. One is to pay attention to research, development of the seed, multiplication of the seed, and the certification of what seed that is put on the market. And by seed, we mean seed for crops, seed for animals, and seed for fish. We appreciate that this agenda has been largely driven by our development partners in the private sector. But over time, we have established that despite the job well done, government needs to pay special attention in this area. And in order for PDM to succeed, there's people who are managing circles, who are borrowing money from the circles. If they don't access the right seeds, then they will not be able first to improve their incomes, but also to pay back the money in the circles. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is to concentrate on handling the issues related to disease and disease control. Disease for animals, disease in crops, those are the pests, and also now disease in fish. This aspect has made it very difficult to access premium markets, and therefore has made it difficult for Ugandan products to reach the market that gives them more money. And therefore, government is concentrating on this to ensure that the private sector does their business, they access the right acaricides, they access the right fertilizers, the right inputs they want to improve their business. 3, to pay attention to mechanization and the water for production. With the well-known climate change effects now, it is increasingly becoming difficult for farming to continue to be profitable if we are relying on the natural phenomenon. And therefore, we are concentrating on appropriate technology that can help the different Ugandans in the different areas of the country. And 4, to pay attention to farmer education. Many farmers are doing a lot of work, but also in the process they are doing many wrong things. And by that, they are losing their money. It is important that government organizes the farmers, either in farm organizations or in groups like now the PDMs, putting them in circles, and they provide them with the appropriate agriculture practices so that they don't waste their money in the process. The 4th one is to pay attention to post-harvest losses. This country is experiencing a lot of loss. People are producing, but in the process, because they are not able to handle the harvest, they make a lot of losses. And yet, some of these can be reduced if government working together with the private sector, the post-harvest losses aspect along the value chain is attended to. And that goes with primary processing. If we continue to allow people to sell their products in raw form without adding any value, they are losing a lot of money, and they're not going to become competitive. And many of them will just be in farming for 1 season or 2 seasons, and then they leave. So I want to see what we can do, at least in the area of primary processing, and then see how we can add value. And of course, as you are doing post-harvest handling and primary processing, then you are positioning these products for the market. That's market access. Market, Mr. Chairman, since you are in academia and you are in economics, you are an economist, we need to redefine markets. to go beyond the physical place where we take goods and services to sell, the Karerwe, the Nakasero, the market we used to study, to now consumer behavior. So people must produce well knowing who is going to consume what they are producing, so that they are not frustrated after producing, the products are not up to standard, and therefore they cannot access the market. And this is the work of government. Individuals may not do it themselves first, they may not even know the market tests and the preferences of the market. And the government, together with the big players in the private sector, we can work together to improve this. Lastly, affordable agriculture financing. I think it is no longer possible to borrow money commercially and go into agriculture and expect to survive. Therefore, the ministry is trying to work with other stakeholders in government, the bigger government, to make sure that progressively those who are now in agriculture for business are able to access financing that can be repaid using the proceeds from their activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You've actually done your duty. You are not here to discuss the paper by the PSST. You are here actually to convey a message to the PSST on what he needs to give you money for, but also to inform him on how the agricultural sector is looking at the planning. There was a time, and I'm glad DG is here, many people do not connect agriculture with export revenues. But when we badly needed the dollars, government created an agricultural secretariat in the Bank of Uganda. Maybe we need to go back there because the reserves need to a functioning agriculture. So sometimes we need a conversation between the central bank and the Ministry of Agriculture, because both are beneficiaries of this succeeding. And as we raise the financing is an issue. So as we raise the central bank rate, is everybody facing it the same way? We used to have window 1 and window 2. We cannot go back there, but still, the principle seems to still be there, that certain policies disadvantage certain other people differently. So how do you address those in the cracks? How do you address somebody who wants to borrow from Mr. Kaketo and is going to rear cows? So where does he get the first payment for the first month when his cows are still not yet there? Are we covering all the holes? Are we dealing with all the... This conversation is really trying to raise the issues and not the answers as such, but in between the conversations, the answers are going to emerge. The farm to fork conversation, you don't just grow your melon and you think it will be sold in Europe. The Europeans have behavior. They have an expectation on how sweet and large your melon should be. So you're not just going to walk with any melon into Europe. So I think that's a point of looking at it as a value chain. And I saw some Ugandan handling exports into Europe saying, we only buy from farmers who have numbers. Now, as the Minister of Agriculture, and I don't know who else, given our farmers the numbers they need to penetrate, because traceability requires I know where this melon came from. That's what the Europeans are asking for. So it's not just about irrigating, it's not just about putting a road there and a railway. That railway may carry the product and it's not acceptable in Europe because of another software issue. And somebody who sits in this conversation and deals with this side and the other side cannot be anything other than the bankers. Mr. Kaketo, these people come to you with all their challenges to finance them. Some of them, the other day, somebody was borrowing from a bank to go and stock for Christmas. He hasn't consulted us whether we intend to buy things for Christmas. Now this person is taking a problem to the banks and the central bank. First ask, is there a market for us to buy balloons and Santa Claus and all those decorations for Christmas before you stock them? The economy has hit us hard, and some of us are only literally looking for half a kilo of meat for Christmas and no decorations. So please, before you stock the people you finance, Mr. Kaketo, speak to the theme.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muhumuza. The Deputy Governor, Bank of Uganda, PSST, ladies and gentlemen, I beg to stand on all the protocols that have been observed earlier. Good afternoon. I come from the banking industry, so really I'll bias myself towards the banking industry. In terms of survival, stabilizing the economy in the last 2 years, I think the industry has played a very big role in terms of offering credit relief to borrowers to the tune of 7.9 trillion. That is the volume of loans that have been restructured. And not all these borrowers have fully recovered. So we still stand with a risk along the way. We've given them time, more time, but we are hoping things will get better and they will recover. Collectively, as an industry, we thought about specific areas where we want to intervene to accelerate economic growth. And these are one, manufacturing. We sat together and we came up with a regional export facility of 1 trillion shillings. This is supposed to spark growth in manufacturing and exports. It's going to have flexibility in terms of structures, and the pricing is going to be very good. So for all those who are involved in manufacturing and export business, we believe this will make the players more competitive and also contribute towards the PSST's interventions he has mentioned around export promotion and import substitution. The other area is agribusiness and value chain financing. I think it's quite a complex subject whenever we talk about agribusiness because of the breadth. It is a very broad area in terms of the players who are involved in making agriculture a success. The banks can't do it on their own. We need government support at various levels. For example, the people who are dealing with production are mainly smallholder farmers and rural communities. It must be worthwhile for them, like Mr. Segawa mentioned, after one season to go back and plant another season. However, if the model is such that they don't make any decent return, and the return is made by a trader or a supplier, someone who's supplying a processor, then it is very difficult and a very big disadvantage for people in production to continue in production. Or it is very difficult for them to improve farming methods, improve quality, like you've mentioned, get proper access, affordable financing. So that is one of the structural areas that needs to really be addressed. Talking about the parish development model, I think one of the biggest advantages is that government has created the structures at a parish level, mobilizing groups to come together. Because for banks, it's very difficult to intervene in communities that are very fragmented. It's very, very difficult. But if you find very structured organizations on the ground, circles and groups, I believe the banks will come and complement what government is already affording these circles. Some of them will be successful. Not all will be successful, but there are some circles that will get it right. And I believe if they partner with banks, they'll be able to scale up and do a lot more than probably what was originally planned in terms of production and business. The other area I can talk about is the industry supporting local content for oil and gas. And that is very, very important as we move this journey towards commercializing oil. And we believe this is a very, very important intervention that will also contribute towards accelerating economic growth. Those are the major areas I'll talk about, and I beg to stop here. Maybe one other point is, which is very important, banks will survive. Our sustainability is based on supporting the private sector and the communities in which we operate. We don't take a lot of pride lending to government, and that is the narrative I would like to correct. Our sustainability, our business sustainability is
supporting the business community and the private sector. And yesterday, I think Bank of Uganda sent a very big signal in terms of interest rates. And I believe many market players are going to react to that there is a possibility that the interest rates are coming down. We believe, based on the results we saw, we don't think it's a temporary blip. Hopefully it was like a signal that now you need to go back and lend to the private sector. Thank you very much.
And also there is a signal from the PSST trying to slow down borrowing from the domestic market so that banks can go back and do what they want to do best, lending to the private sector. So this borrowing, you may have different views about it. The 500 million euro that's supposed to come out from out there, but PSST has ably given us some confidence that we will not only be leaving some money here for the private sector to deal with, also sending a signal that the central bank, the government is not about to put an upward pressure on interest rates, but also will save about 2 trillion over the next 10 years by borrowing from these other kinds of markets. So there are a lot of things that are really happening. I was about to ask whether we need an agricultural bank. I've had that conversation out there. I don't want to join that conversation. We need agricultural finance, but doesn't have to be an agricultural bank. That's my view, and you can reply on what was the hashtag. Please, we can debate that in cyberspace, because I'm just moderating and trying to preempt people to come up with ideas. One of the other beneficiaries of agricultural finance, and as we mentioned, because agricultural finance sometimes may be very difficult to structure, is why government has put out things like the Paris Development Model, so that the subsistence who can't get to a bank or who need more flexible borrowing can come through the PDM. The PDM is supposed to finance subsistence livelihoods, and 25 out of 39 of the subsistence are in agriculture. So we are hoping these things will work, and Sarah raises very important things. That's the design. The reality can be completely different from the design, basically because of some governance issues. So governance is critical for us to get values out of these efforts and initiatives. But also we know that my colleague from agriculture was saying, can we make sure we add value so that the farmer gets something good out of their harvest? Now, from the research point of view, we have discovered that there are some farmers who never get even to the harvest. They actually sell their cassava before it is ready, because they need to pay fees. Fees does not know when cassava matures or when it has been sold. Exams are in December. Regardless of where your crop is, you sell it. So by the time you add value, the farmer is completely long gone out of this transaction. So trade is another dicey thing out there, and somebody here to tell us about trade issues. Jemba, was that the name? And Kasita. Sometimes we call you Kasita without knowing you actually have a Chiganda name that puts you in a certain clan. But it's okay to be in the clan of the Kasita. So what is it like on your side of the traders? And remember, you're speaking for the traders.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Muhumuza. Honorable Chambade, and I know why I'm starting with Honorable Chambade. He has been our minister for long.
We also know why.
Diligently. The Deputy Governor, Bank of Uganda, I think the PSST has just left. Protocols observed, not forgetting my chairman, Private Sector Foundation, Mr. Anzei. First and foremost, I'd like to say that as the trading sector of this country, we have been moving a long journey trying to outmaneuver where we have really failed to make it, that is import. Many of us are trying to go into other different areas to make sure that we can cope with what the PSST has just raised, that we meet the demands of the economy. we have to change, not because the only way a solution has. However, because the president has been moving across the globe, within the region, looking for markets, so we are turning our focus into how much we can do as the business community to facilitate and meet the demands of the regional markets as a way of adding whatever percentage to the growth of this country. We have been sitting on different forums trying to come up with a solution, and we realized that if we can take the side of having an export logistics center or logistics export center, this can facilitate that area from the ordinary person to the big one. Reason simply, when the PSST talks about facilitating private sector, by implication, is looking at how much can get out of the private sector, how much you can do to help him grow the economy as a private sector, where the trading community or the business community are members. We are looking at establishment of a export logistics center in the country with the support of Mr. Gobi and others in order to facilitate not only the business community, but also my brother Segawa's community, that is the people in agriculture and other areas, farming or farmers, since we all know how much of consumption of Ugandan products regional market has been taking on. Of recent, we heard what the President of Kenya was saying, alluding to when he was addressing his cabinet, that is going to allow Ugandan market, Ugandan milk onto Kenyan market, because it was cheap. And they can easily make a difference. They sell theirs to Europe and other countries while importing from Uganda to Kenya. And now we are saying, how much can we provide, or how much can we meet that demand on the side of Kenya? How much can we meet the demand in other areas or other markets? We said DRC Congo, which was recently opened, the Burundi market. We have a delegation which is in Djibouti right now, looking for markets as well. We have the Southern Sudan market, and we know how much we have been getting out of the markets regionally, or how much we have been providing. And this easily absorbs the shocks of failure to have employment within the communities or within the youth in the country, women as well, by having such markets and meeting the demands of the market. Then we can demand from government what they can do, say on the side of standards, policy formulation, which can enable us be key players within the regional market. My chairman did me justice when he talked about some of the issues that have been hindering progress on that side. We have this issue of transport. We are facing one of the biggest challenge, that is transport, which is even way beyond 50% of our input. And hopefully, like the PSST alluded to, that railway is one area which government intends to address. Hopefully this can come sooner than later, because we have seen the progress in that side when from other regional players like Tanzania and Kenya. However, in Uganda we have been slow on that side, and we all know that railway is one of the cheapest means of transport, which we very much still lack as a country. Hopefully on that side, PSST can add water transport for connectivity within the region, We have seen the multimodal being implemented between Tanzania and Uganda, from Dar es Salaam to Mwanza, then Mwanza to Portobello. And of recent, the introduction of ferries from Kisumu to either Portobello or Kauku in Entebbe. And that can mitigate minimally, but it can be a starting point to help us grow the sector as well. Yesterday we had the experience, and today we are having the experience of power outage. Nationally, because no one can claim to have had power after 9. This has been a challenge. Power outage is causing a lot of problem with the private sector in general. And we all know the importance of power in the growth of any economy. Not forgetting the cost of power in this country, unlike other partner states, which makes our goods uncompetitive. Those being produced from within, and those we are importing into the country. Then we have this animal, which is a necessary evil, the taxes. PSST, I don't know how much you are going to do on the side of taxation. Uganda's taxation is one of the highest compared to other partner states in the region. At 55 to 65% of imports, where most of our members are involved, we think something needs to be done to address that side in order to facilitate more inclusion and more participation of Ugandans into business. And at the back of our mind, we all know that over 75% of Ugandans are private sector players. And these include the farmers, they include the trading community, they include drivers and others. Many of them self-made. Not forgetting 65 of Ugandans, especially youth, Ugandan youth from universities being unemployed. 65 of every 100 that come out of higher institutions of learning. So, bottom line, they all go into businesses. For starters, there is no way we can manage when an enterprise in Uganda, as much as we are so enterprising, we cannot manage when an enterprise cannot even last for 5 years. That needs government to look into this matter. Why is it that in Uganda, as much as we are enterprising, we cannot last 5 years? What can be done? What is not being done rightly? And if you can address some of these, then a lot can be achieved. Then cost of finance, which was raised by my chairman from Private Sector Foundation. The cost of finance in this country is really, really high. And we all know it's one of the enablers of the growth of an economy, because not many people can really afford to generate their own capitals without getting loans, that is from Mr. Kaketo and others. So as much as we need to go into import substitution, as much as we are pushing for exports, there is a need to concentrate where most of the people right now are grow gradually. Just like we can identify a few individuals who started as traders, that is the late BMK, then Mr. Ntake Gasta of Ntake Group, Wavamuno and others, the late Murwana and many others. Can we allow the sector grow holistically, gradually, other than putting a rope in our neck, pulling us towards the side of exports, whereby not much has been done in the form of homework for the business community. Inform them the direction of the markets which needs to be identified in order to make sure that we can grow through the systems as business community and contribute towards the government coffers or the country coffers from that side. Then lastly, as a country, we have failed at times to get our priorities right. We know how our strength lies, and this is where we should have started. Can we industrialize depending on the strength of the country? That is agriculture, of which it has several sectors. We go through agro-processing. If we have this, if we can aggregate, say, the cotton industry, as it used to be during the days of the past leadership. If we can have the aquaculture industry, that is the fish farmers, apiculture industry, that is the beekeepers, organize them, know where we're going to sell the products. I heard my brother here talking about failure to get markets. The truth of the matter is we have markets for everything, but in the country, the people have not been organized by the powers that be. Can we have them organized? The president have been moving around looking for markets. We cannot even meet the demands of the markets that are still available. Reasons, we are not organized. People have not been informed. We haven't done much on that side, having each and every one on board. From that ordinary person in Nakaseke, who is growing mangoes, a sector which is growing, fruit sector which is growing with higher demands within the region, but how much have we done? Can we have it aggregated as a sector? Have juice gotten from Nakaseke? We put up centers, just like I talked about the logistics, export logistics center. Can we have centers where such products or produce can be, value can be added, instead of bringing mangoes to Nakasero? Can we have juice being taken to I'm forgetting the company at Intinda. Come again? Yeah, Britannia. Can we have juice from Nakaseke, juice from Teso, juice from other areas of the country to Britannia, instead of bringing raw mangoes to Nakasero, where many of them even fail to be bought and they end up on the dustbin? Can we have the fish industry, that is the aquaculture industry, once organized, a market is there. We can meet the supply as long as we have the necessary enabling environment. That is the standards. How much have we done on the side of the standards, say of fish and different other products that we are trying to produce as a country and then sell them to other markets? We've had the challenge of European markets, but now we have the regional markets. We are saying once we are organized as a group, we can do a lot with the DRC Congo, we can do a lot with Southern Sudan. We can do a lot with Ethiopia, which we hope is coming very soon. We can do a lot with Somalia and other regional markets once Mr. Gobi and his team, as promised, can meet their promises to the business community. I submit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to listen to the real drivers of the economy, the real issues they face. For me and you, we can sit and say we have 1,300 megawatts, and Karuma is coming on board, Isimba is on board. An outage like the one of yesterday does not know that surplus to a manufacturer, because his process is halted, a lot of inputs are lost. So for them, it's not that conversation that we do politically to say Uganda has surplus power. But even by the words we talk of surplus power, the ST here has a word called deemed power. It's really a big leakage in his budget. If power is not being used, somebody is paying for it. So those the realities really is what we want to bring out, so that we don't fly in the air like Carolis do. These are marble stocks. We must walk down like snails do. That's why snails are slow, because they have to really deal with those ground-based issues. But they have survived if you know what to do, if you can stabilize the economy. Governor, thank you very much. We appreciate the efforts. It's not easy to stabilize the ship. Many of us are not in the cockpit. We're only saying, where is turbulence? Why is turbulence? But you ask the pilot in that cockpit, you have no idea what is going through. To stabilize that ship is not easy. But we are saying after stability, how do we get this off? So that surplus power is not speaking to the manufacturer if there are still outages. Those things do disturb their system, and they really want to have that sorted out. You talked about Untake, and I remembered my conversation with really one of the bread manufacturers in this country, who said, all I am looking for is 1 ton of cassava per day to replace the wheat from Ukraine, to cut down the inflation, to save the foreign exchange. This person could not and still cannot get 1 ton of cassava per day. He was ready to pay the supplier 6 months upfront. So it's not about Kaketo here making money or disrupting any business. So when we talk about agro-industrialization, do we know what we're talking about? Remember, the cassava for bread is not like the cassava for alcohol. So even as we promote cassava, are we going into that detail? Do we know where it is, or are we just broadcasting messages? So this conversation we are saying, as we stabilize the ship, as we stabilize the economy, sustainability will require going beyond the rhetoric. Sitting down with the real captains of the business to tell you what are their challenges, what are their dynamics. And out there are people on social media. We don't want to miss them. You're not the only ones with us. We have many people out there. And we made sure this session begins before the World Cup, so everybody is with us. The World Cup begins at 6 after we have closed. So everybody is with us. Priscilla, what have they said?
Well, on social media, allow me to pick a comment from YouTube. We do have BKR Kita, who's saying, Ugandans cannot own small-scale factories due to monopolization of everything. We do have some other reactions on Twitter. Bonita Male says, Mr. Ramadan Gobi's speech has been heavily aligned towards strategies that the government is undertaking towards managing the economy in the current times. Very enriching speech. Clever Mwesije on Twitter says, at least the rise in the commercial bank rate from 6% to 10% has left us in the stable state. Too much in circulation would cause us more harm. We would be at a worse place. Lydia Mirembe says economic development requires peace, easy taxes, and a tolerable administration of justice. Leave everything else to the natural courses of life. And she also quotes from the PSST's speech, quoted #Adam Smith, as he concluded in his speech, one wonders, are these 3 requisites present in Uganda today? you do have David Birungi, who comes in and says we are actually stable. The changes in microeconomic indicators have a low gradient. Even the change in utilities inflation was negative, meaning you have more value for your fuel, for your yaka, for your water, for your MBs. ISCKY 17 says revenue to GDP ratio will rise alongside rise in debt burden. The economy's sustainability in fluctuations domestically arise from the need to rebound and facilitate accumulating debts. We can't diversify from borrowing to provide a subsidized private sector. And the final comment for now, I will take it from Ngude Kakande. To me as a person, I'm not against government programs, and I agree with developing poor Ugandans. But, why do government programs fail and Ugandans remain poor? So many question marks. I think it's just because some government officials are also poor.
What a good way to end those submissions from cyberspace. Those are Ugandans. Some are in Uganda, some are outside Uganda. Thank you, NTV, for making sure this is an inclusive conversation, listening in from the young ones. And by the way, I wanted to comment about the demography in this room. I'm happy to see very many people who you will introduce and say, this is Professor Kamuntu, and they will say, who is he? Because there is younger generation and there's the older generation. This is the future of this country. This is the demography of this country. This is why we are discussing an economic conversation that will stabilize us and give us inclusive and sustainable growth for a long time. Mr. Kaboyo, I'm going to ask you to fully introduce yourself as you come in to speak to the theme. The reason I want you to fully introduce yourself, as I've said, there are very many young people who, me, I can call you Mr. Kaboyo. They are like, okay, who is he? But also there are those on TV, so NTV wants to run your full name underneath. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, Dr. Muhumuza. My name is Stephen Kaboyo. I run a company called Alpha Capital. It's a financial services firm. I'm also the chairman of Total Energies Uganda. I chair the advisory board of Total. I'm also the council of Czech Republic in Uganda. Today, the views I'm going to express here are entirely mine, do not represent or reflective or anybody I work for, so it's entirely my own views. That's who I am. I get to speak, I get to be the last to speak, so I guess I have a little bit more time to discuss a few issues. Dr. Msingu, is that right?
Muhumuza is the name?
I'm sorry, I keep confusing Dr. Muhumuza.
But don't speak for them, speak in your slot of time. You have 3 to 5 minutes, that should be sufficient.
All right, apologies, Dr. Muhumuza. I'm going to speak touching on 2 issues which have come up in this conversation. One is the issue that is reflecting a lot of debate. A lot of debate is raging around the debt sustainability issues. Today, I want to begin by saying that by and large, Uganda's fiscal prospects are quite fragile. We need to realize that and start a conversation with that in mind. Secondly, we are at unprecedented debt levels. This is not only unique for Uganda, but also globally. So we also need to take that into account. But before I get into the first point I want to discuss, which is public debt, then I cross over into private sector debt, which is also another interesting debate. I want to say that debt per se is not a bad thing. Debt is good. Every country borrows. However, it is how you manage that debt that you acquire. Secondly, debt at whatever level is affordable as long as the interest rates are low. We are living in a very turbulent global wave of tightening financial conditions globally, as well as the behavior of central banks around the world, which have taken a hawkish stance to deal with inflation. And what that means is higher interest rates. But this is now. Stepping back to where we have come from, why are we where we are now? I want to pick up on a couple of issues. If you broadly categorize what causes debt buildup, and I want to avoid the controversial issue of unsustainability, I want to use or introduce another word, which is debt overhang. We have a debt overhang in this country, and we need to accept that. The whole issue about mistrust is there. I'm glad the PSST picked up on the issue of mistrust. I think there is a lot of mistrust driven by, again, the other point he mentioned, lack of transparency. We do not come out and communicate properly, especially from our economic managers, on what exactly is the composition of our debt. There are gaps there. I can pick on a few. One would be, how do we categorize debt? Is guarantees given by government a composition in our debt? Are all these private equity participation, government participation that we do, the controversial hospital in Lubowa, the other public equity participations, are those also included? Do we have other types of debt, such as debt of public enterprises? If those are not part of what we see, then many questions will always be asked. So the issue here, and I will quickly jump to a suggestion for our economic managers, is to be as transparent as we can so that everybody is aligned. Today, you'll pick numbers from the civil societies, you'll pick a number from Minister of Finance, Bank of Uganda will give you a number. Parliament has become very professional and they have expertise, I think. They have their own numbers, so we are not all aligned. And that is the point of mistrust and not really trusting the numbers that come through. But going back to the factors, macroeconomic, institutional factors, we need to really understand where we came from. About 5 years ago, when all this build-up started, I think the issue was government putting forward a very ambitious infrastructure development program. It's not a bad thing to invest in infrastructure, but in hindsight, perhaps we took on too much that we could afford. Again, looking back, we could have prioritized, said maybe Karuma would come first, we'll take a pause, get into Isimba, and many others. That, front-loading projects is part of the results that we see now. The other issue is really, and we have to appreciate this, weaknesses in our institutional frameworks. I think we have challenges on every stage of our expenditure cycle. A commitment of funds, cash flow management, proper budgeting, because year in, year out, we set targets, revenue targets that we cannot meet. What that does is there is always a snowballing effect, where you kick the can down the road, and it has started catching up with us. The other issue in terms of why are we where we are, shocks, cyclical shocks, of course, COVID effects, geopolitical issues, all these have piled pressure on government finances, and we may not have too much wiggle room. So in terms of where we're coming from and the outlook, I don't think it will get better. It may get worse before it gets better. So we need to be able to have that in mind. Then lastly, before I get into what needs to be done, is this whole issue understanding, which underpins all this. Our revenues are always less than our expenditures. I'm glad my colleague here touched on it, but if we continue with that imbalance, we will not get out of this. Will not get out of this, you know, sort of running around and trying to manage our debt numbers. So revenue imbalance is a major challenge. So we need to be looking at how can we bring this down? How can we manage our expenditure within the limitation of the envelope we have? I think on that one, we have failed to rein this in, and we need to face it soberly and deal with it. Now, let me quickly go to what can be done. What can be done, and these are ideas.
I wanted to punctuate your submission so that what can be done is going to come in the second round.
Okay.
Let's first
allow me to...
but you can just finish that point.
Okay. Dr. Msinguzi, I wanted to just bring in the other component of the private sector debt, private sector areas, and then we can home in on what needs to be done. Private sector areas is another I think a big challenge that we need to deal with. With the strong winds the economy is facing, really the domestic economy is hurting. When you look at the private sector areas, nobody can pinpoint, from where we sit at least, what are the levels. Is there a freeze? Are these accumulating? Are they attracting interest? What is going on? You look at the businesses in the private sector, businesses are shutting down. There's a lot of foreclosures. Every day you open a newspaper, you'll see auctions of properties. Now, I don't think this can continue, otherwise we'll lose the theme of private sector-led economy. So we have a lot of challenges on that front. One idea that I would like to put across, and this is sort of a strategy, clearance strategy, I would call it, and this is for PSST to consider with his team. I would like to make a suggestion. This is a simple, basic securitization of these private areas. And we can think about PSST and his team sort of securitizing them and issue promissory notes. Promissory notes which convert these debts into some sort of acceptable, tradable tool that our businesses can use to go to the bank and say, look, the government has agreed to pay me at a certain time, and please hold on, don't auction my house, don't take my business down. URA, please consider this as an IOU. It's a financial tool. Government is promising me to pay. They don't have money now at a later stage. I don't know, or perhaps around the law, the legal dimensions around that, but this is an idea that I think can help out the private sector, especially at this time when everybody is bleeding. I want to pause there. Dr. Muhumuza.
Thank you very much. The PSST's team is listening from wherever they are. Some views and ideas coming through, can they be operationalized? This meeting is about gathering those views, and one of the people who has been scratched in this meeting, Dr. Patrick Birungi, you hold some equity on behalf of government in a number of entities out there. Private sector balance sheet sometimes hold something they call contingent liability. How are those balance sheets from where you sit? I'm not biasing you to anything that you must speak to, but since you hold, please bring a microphone to Dr. Patrick Birungi. He's the Executive Director, Uganda Development Corporation. I hope that is it, what it is.
You got it right. Thank you, moderator. I don't want to confuse names whether you are Muhumuza or Msinguzi, but I will call you a moderator for now. I'd like to start by also recognizing Honorable Amelia sitting next to me, because this lady signed my appointment letter. It's a tough question. It's a tough question. First of all, who is UDC? UDC, we are the investment arm of government established by UDC Act of 2016, particularly to facilitate and promote industrial and economic development in the country. Our philosophy is very simple, that we invest on behalf of government where there are market failures. We do not compete with the private sector, but we go in to support the private sector do their work. Our portfolio, I had mentioned earlier in what was showing in agro-processing, in the service industry, and the mineral subsector. And our investment criteria is a simple one. You either create jobs, you utilize local raw materials, you improve the trade balance, you are geographically balanced, and you also promote local entrepreneurship development. First, I'd like to thank the PSST for the presentation, but most importantly, to thank all our policymakers for a more stable policy regime. I think we've been able to achieve what we are achieving because of a stable macro policy regime that this country enjoys. In some countries, you probably hear interest rate caps one day and the following day they are removed, and price subsidies here and the following day they are removed. But being firm to that policy regime has been very, very critical to where we are. However, on the micro, because I'm no longer working in the macro space, on the micro space, we get a lot of hurt as a result of this. We try to tighten belts, but sometimes things are hard. I will highlight, for example, we have a lot of stressed companies walking our corridors on a daily. And maybe thanks for some of these stresses, these days, part of my job is to engage CEOs of financial institutions. Many are here seated, to try and we find solutions to some of these stresses. It's a very big challenge, Governor, that these CEOs are struggling with. So as we do the macro level discussions, we need to do a thorough analysis on the micro level impacts of those discussions. We've seen operations costs at our facilities go up as well, critically eroding the profitability of those investments that we make. The exchange rate volatility that we've observed over time, in January, averaging monthly at about 3,524. In October, 822 on average, has caused a lot of losses at our level. Such small changes, I don't know whether they are small, but such changes in the exchange rate are having big implications and increasing foreign exchange risks for businesses that are really trading in those two different currencies. Inflation has been there. I'm glad to notice that at least we are beginning to have a change in direction. But it's been a pain for most of these private sector actors. And as a result of all this, we have a lot. But what is important is we also monitor the market side. We monitor the composite index of economic activity. We monitor the business tendency index. They are on the positive side, meaning that there is optimism, positive optimism, that the economy is regaining its due place. In conclusion, I would say that the PSST made it very clear that the limited resources will be invested in those right areas that bring the greatest returns, and where else other than UDC. So PSST would like you to capitalize UDC. I'd like you to capitalize UDB so that they can do the right intervention that will actually lead to part of that theme, which is sustainable, inclusive growth. So we are there willing to support the private sector. We only need to be supported to be to that level. Thank you very much, Moderator.
I told you, for the captains in the cockpit, it is never that easy. Many of us will just watch NTV giving us business highlights on what happened to the exchange rate. You have even forgotten what it was yesterday. As you watch on Tuesday, you don't know what it was on Monday. But there is a business captain whose that movement of 10 shillings really affects their business, especially if you are dealing with $10 million of trade and the movement is 20 shillings. That can erode your profit. That can really wipe out your business. So at the bottom, when you talk about stabilizing the economy, the governor has a very big business of making sure the foreign exchange is stable. Even as he's having challenges of having to pay back the debts, he's watching his reserves, he's watching the exports. I think that's why at that time we really brought in the Agricultural Secretariat into the Bank of Uganda, because we are handling coffee as if it's just coffee. Coffee is dollars. Coffee is part of this stabilization. The fish is part of this stabilization. So it's not just agriculture sitting out there in Entebbe. They are contributing to these conversations. And really this summit is about bringing the whole picture together so that we can meet in the same room and we can have a conversation together. The banker, who is also watching, as Kaketo said, I'm not just interested in lending to them. Their survival is my sustainability. There's no bank that is interested in selling off people's businesses. Because if you sell off and the next person doesn't continue that business, you literally have no depositor tomorrow. And what are you going to do without a deposit? So it's a whole conversation of intertwined things. So I wanted to bring in Mr. Godfrey Sebana from Head of Corporate Commercial Institute Banking at Standard Chartered. Are you with us? Physical?
Thank you.
Oh, Standard Chartered.
Thank you, Dr. Muhumuza.
You're welcome. Thank you for putting on a white shirt. There have been a lot of conversations between you and the other white shirt of the PSST. But for now, you have a blank check. It never happens in banking.
Well, thank you, and I will congratulate you for the yellow shirt. Probably it's...
Let's leave the color of the shirts.
Allow me to recognize the honorable legislators that are here present. I also really want to recognize the policy implementers, most especially the PSST and my boss, the acting governor, and also captains of the different industries here present, and Ugandans at large. Really, if I'm to sum up the discussions, I will say that every speaker was focusing on one thing, which is driving efficiency. When you are in a storm that we are currently faced with globally, where our countries are really threatened in terms of so many challenges, and I will not really sound like a broken record going through them, one has to do one thing, which is to focus on driving efficiencies. And our PSST highlighted several strategic interventions from government, Some were really short term, some were medium term, and some long term. But coming from the financial sector, allow me to focus on some of those interventions that are really critical from a financial sector perspective. One is really driving borrowing costs. And of course, every business and every client out there is really looking for that cheap capital. Increasingly, we are noticing a lot of private entities and also governments tapping into the global capital pools that are a lot cheaper. And I'm extremely glad that the financial sector in Uganda is really well capacitized to hold our clients to get into these cheap capital pools. You've seen banks like Standard Chartered Bank, where I work, supporting government to realize this sort of initiative. And so many customers within the private space have now realized that capital that we need to use is not defined by our jurisdiction. It's really global. And we really have to make sure that we get into there. Of course, like I mentioned, the financial sector in Uganda is extremely well capacitized. My vice chairman from a UBA perspective, Julius, has really alluded to the fact that there is quite a lot of strategic intervention within the value chain. Mr. Segawa, who comes from the agriculture ministry, has said that agriculture is a value chain. You will notice that people down at the bottom of the pyramid have to understand why they are producing these commodities. It is useless if there are no off-takers to process them into products that are going to really be consumed and purchased in our retail stores. So I'm glad that we are now opening up that door to really finance some key infrastructure projects that are really aimed at supporting people that are down at the pyramid and then really providing that capital to the entities that are on the top of the pyramid to punch way above their weight and really support the region and obviously the rest of the world in terms of the export products that are coming out of the country. I must say that there's one area that we need to be cognizant of that is really topical of late, and that's the ESG agenda. A lot of these capital pools require us to really focus on environmental and social governance. I can assure you that there are several taxonomies that have been put out there. And it's good that we are talking about ESG where there are several legislators here. We need to really agree as a country, what's our taxonomy? What are those rules that we are going to follow if we are to really grow sustainably? And that's where the cheap capital is. And that's how we have to substitute the brown capital with the green capital. At the end of the day, I'm extremely glad and listening to some of the presenters here that that journey has started. I will be very clear that from a policy perspective, Bank of Uganda is really leading us as a sector in terms of ensuring that we really drive our ESG agenda. Companies that are really driving projects that are really sustainable will not struggle in getting cheaper capital. That I can assure you. And for as long as we really conform to what we've defined as sustainability from a Uganda perspective, then we should, as an industry, also see quite a lot more benefits coming to such players. Finally, for us within the financial sector, driving efficiency is really more of disrupting our models. Back in the days, it was largely brick and mortar. Now we've gone digital. We are going digital not only to realize cost efficiencies, but to really respond to the scalability of our operations. To drive financial inclusion, you cannot afford to reach the masses by driving these famous brick and mortar models. So that's why we've heavily invested in our digital capabilities, just to emphasize the fact that they are more, they are more friendly, and I don't have to even really elaborate what the benefits are. But most importantly, the aspect of having a trail of whatever you do can only be achieved if you go digital. I can assure you, if you are to benchmark with some of the markets that we see, being a global bank, we really benchmark ourselves with some of the global markets that are leading the way. When you look at the ease of accessing credit in markets like Singapore, markets like China, the US, UAE, it's a lot easier because all this information is available and it's really supported by the infrastructure that has been set up with those governments. We noticed that a business application can be processed in minutes. where terms are sent to, for as long as you upload your financials, of course your tax record is very clear, your credit score can be generated with the automated tools that we have, and we can give you a limit, a pre-approved limit instantly, within 14 minutes. This is what JP Morgan is doing. And immediately, if you consent to the terms and conditions, a limit is loaded. And then you can access financing. You can even prescribe the tenors and every whole aspect of what rates are you going to sign up for. Because if you want to go into the market for a 4-month period, then you should go for that. And it should be decided within a matter of minutes. I'm extremely glad that we are getting there. And I want to urge my fellow Ugandans to really support the digital agenda. It's not easy to disrupt your operations. You might look at it as innovating for failure, but at least try to smell the cheese and focus on what where the world is heading. Allow me to stop there, but I want to thank fellow Ugandans for really, and of course the management of NTV and Minister of Finance and the other sponsors for organizing this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much from Stanchart. The conversation includes you out there. I want to see some 3 hands off the floor that I can quickly pick. I can see one there. I can see another one, and the third must be a lady. Okay, you take it. 1, 2, 3, and it's done.
Thank you.
Oh, no, I hadn't even picked this one, but you can proceed. You have 1 minute.
Thank you for allowing me to market how little I know. But I'm here to know, to get to know more. Economic inflation is caused by food prices, among others. Food insecurity is a result of climate change. Dear listeners, according to the World Bank report, 130 million people will cross over to extreme poverty by 2030. And according to UBOS's report, the Multidimensional Index report, states 18 million Ugandans are below the poverty line. So this is not reflecting the data and statistics read by the PSST. So we want to see these statistics in the lives of people. The issue of climate financing, it is the one that I want to raise. It's not streamlined and not prioritized. Yet we have a global shock. And that global shock is climate change, which is causing food insecurity and other related matters, destabilizing our economy. So the other issue goes to the Undersecretary Minister of Finance, the issue of irrigation financing. I tried to have an irrigation at my farm, but the cost, the contribution, the equity I was supposed to make was even beyond what the ministry is asking for me to make. So what priorities or how are you planning to ease irrigation financing, which will boost sustainable agriculture, so that we can achieve all these aspirations we are talking to in this room? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's noted. There is a gentleman, another white shirt with a red tie. If you notice, my yellow shirt is unique. And I knew none of you was going to put on yellow shirts here. I don't know why. But that, for me, makes it me different from the rest of you. Yes, sir, your name and your submission in 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muhumuza. My name is Abeka Mayanja, and I would like to also add my voice to those thanking NTV and our sponsors for having this dialogue and to have the key decision makers here with us. My humble contribution is about being a bit cautious about dealing with the supply side inflation using interest rate as the policy, because it has a fast-sweeping impact. If you look at the GDP identity, it will have an impact on consumption, it will have an impact on investment, it will have an impact also on the government expenditure, because they are already borrowed in the domestic market to a high level. And so if the rate starts going up, there are several ways in which you can achieve liquidity reduction, for example, using the reserve ratio. And so we need to balance, although we understand the constraint. Then the other key takeaway is energy. And I think that there is fiscal policy that can be exercised to increase the supply of renewable energy. So the solution cannot only be about the grid, because in some areas, like in rural areas, it does not make economic sense to take the grid there. But if there is enabling monetary and fiscal policy that allows renewable energy to be produced and at the right size. For example, if somebody talked about Nakaseke, you know, if you put a plant in Nakaseke, you can use renewable energy. So for the policymakers, if you're having to increase energy production in Uganda, we should have interest rate policy and monetary policy that would go to that. So we can achieve the reduction of costs in the economy by leveraging renewable energy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Right over there.
Thank you, Dr. Muhumuza. I'm called Mbaga Tuzinde from Umeme. And,
you're the right guy to speak, eh?
Yes, there's been quite a lot on tariffs and reliability. Let me limit myself to reliability, especially in the recent past. Of course, the sector, as most of you might be aware, we have the generation, the transmission, and the distribution. And us being at the distribution end, we interact with the customers, and we are supposed to indicate whatever happens or the challenges that might come through. In the recent past, outages are a result of very many factors. It could be due to capacity, but of recent, we've had quite substantial challenges because of vandalism. And vandalism at the transmission segment is very costly. It affects either much of the country or the entire nation. At the distribution end, it's equally disturbing, but the problems are localized. Now, of recent, in the past days, actually in the past few months, there's been vandalism where vandals try to bring down steel, and at the transmission, at the distribution segment, it's not possible to distribute the power when the transmission infrastructure is disturbed. And my appeal now is, of course, vandalism happens because there's a market for steel. If we have to curtail vandalism, we have to start with the market for the products of this vandalism. There's still, the vandals sell all this to some companies. So I believe the Ministry of Trade should interest itself in this so that once the steel market is curtailed, where these people take the equipment, then it becomes much easier to tackle the problem of vandalism. Thank you very much.
He's related vandalism to the steel market, and he's reminded me, PSST, that statement. The poor cannot sleep because they are hungry, and therefore you rich people, you're not going to have power as long as poor people are looking for those pylons to sell them to Katwe and other welding places. There are no two ways around the economy. If anybody is poor, they are going to steal your tire, they are going to steal your money pass, and they are really trying to feed that child they gave birth to yesterday. So do you take them to court? The child will die. Do you call back God to resolve issues? No, God has already given us the knowledge that we must resolve these issues here. Poverty is going to be a problem to all of us. By the time somebody dares to climb a high voltage pylon that guy really has a lion chasing him, and that must be the one-day-old child who needs to be treated. So this conversation is really about dealing with the poverty that affects our people, raising household incomes, which will speak to education. Today I was reading a paper. We always look at the supply side of education, but we never address the demand side. And one of the key factors on the demand for education is household levels of incomes. So raising them will also help us address that. Even manufacturing, you will not survive. Who is going to buy your goods? So really, poor households speak around this conversation, and they are very central, that for everything we are talking about, vandalism, behind it is poverty of some of those, because our growth is not inclusive. And that's why this discussion is not just to stabilize, to get sustainable growth, but it must also be inclusive. And I want to pick a young man behind there. Give him a microphone. I have added another lady because of public demand. Amelia cannot, Honorable Amelia, you definitely, you have done enough. Don't raise that hand again. It is registered and recorded. You were even recognized by him. A young man, speak for that generation.
Thank you very much, Doctor and Moderator. But mine will sound a little bit like ancient words, but I feel, in my opinion, it's where we need to begin. Firstly, we often imagine a possibility of an economy developing or growing without transforming the social and cultural side of it. On that thing, therefore, I would like to, I agree with the only lady on the panel that we need to do the cultural, social, and political transformation to enable us grow holistically as communities. Why? Because each of the economies in this world has embodies institutions, goals, and organizations that actually do not survive without people. That is why there is need for us to develop social, political, and cultural side to enable these societies be part of the development we are talking about. Then also, PSST talked about the need for human capital development. This is very key, and I partly think that if we are doing human capital development and we are not considering groups or societies that have permanent disabling conditions, those who have no or low incomes, because one of the things that strengthens human capital is, of course, incomes, just like Doctor said. So we need to also ensure that we have income maintenance systems for some of these societies or groups of individuals that actually do not have enabling conditions for them to have the income in order to grow. This will also make sure or ensure that we have more household enterprising groups in Uganda. Thank you very much.
Right over here, and then I'll halt. Now I have a problem here, which is a very good problem. Proceed, please.
Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Moderator Dr. Muhumuza. Aside from what Chairman, my name is Sarah Kajingo, Vice Chairperson of the Board of Directors of Private Sector Foundation. So aside from the three issues raised by Chairman Humphrey Nzei, which is the need to further lower cost of electricity, and that the rail will lower transport costs from the sea, and for UDB to revise requirements in order to aid more disbursements. We welcome PSST digitization of procurement. Of course, this will limit human interface and, of course, lower corruption. And for us as business, that means lowering the cost of doing business. The other is that we welcome your support to the private sector BDS, integration of markets, and would like to announce as PSFU that through MasterCard Foundation toward penetration of regional markets, we've supported 2,000 startups to get certification by Uganda, by UNBS. A round of applause to that. The other one is on local content. Recently, at a forum that was attended by private sector and Ministry of Finance officials, we were informed, and we were happy about this, that there has been tremendous effort to increase the proportion of contracts to local farms. But our concern is the definition of a local farm, because we understand that the proportion of the value to local farms of the contracts is 61%, but of these 61%, 53% are domiciled companies in Uganda, and only 8% goes to local farms. Would like to see that improved. The other one is data. Whereas year in and year out, we get to hear that budgets have been appropriated to transformation and to so many things towards human capital development. Data is so important in order to measure impact. So if PSST through you, you'd compel everybody with this data to submit it so we know how many people, for example, have been transformed through these interventions in what particular timelines. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's get to Honorable Amelia Chambade. She has been in these issues and trenches for quite some time. I'm constrained to give her a minute, so I'll give her enough time.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd like to recognize the distinguished panel and all your contributions. I'd like to recognize the CEOs of different organizations here, but most of all the PS who's representing government. I'm going to find it a bit difficult because I'm partly in public sector, but I'm transitioning to private sector. So just bear with me, PS, because I'm going to not hit on the head, but at least to mention a few issues that actually affect members of the private sector as a new discovery by me. I'd like to thank NTV for creating this platform of promoting economic development in this country. I wish all the media houses were doing this. It would definitely go a long way in sensitizing the public, informing the public about government. Government has achieved so much. My senior brother, I recognize you. Sorry. Government has achieved so much in the last so many years. But when I listened in to the PS's speech, I just feel that I should mention a few issues that I felt should be emphasized in his next presentation or any other platform. Number one is on whether we have a provision to mitigate or to cover some of the shocks that have hit this country in the last year or 2 years. Some were mentioned by Madame, but I also mentioned some of them. Now, when you look at the issue of climate change, you can see that some of the areas were badly hit, like Kasese, like Bugisu. I felt that we should be able to mention some of the remedies, because they affected actually the economies in those areas, but also the population. Another point is the correlation between the population growth and infrastructure development. There is a rapid population growth, because if we look at the percentage that our population is growing, it's about 3.9. Rapid. You just go to these hospitals, you'd think they are factories. Babies are born every second. So that is why you find that sometimes these social services are inadequate. You go to a hospital and cannot cater for all the people in those areas. So what remedies, what budgets do we have to be able to balance out or to harmonize the correlation between infrastructure development and population growth? Another shock that I would like to talk about is the rationalization of agencies. Have we thought about the jobs we are going to lose? What plans do we have for that? Okay, these agencies will go into the main sectors, but what happens to the workforce who are employed by the agencies? What happens to their salaries? Because remember, then they will not be able to afford the life they've been leading, because you'll not be able to be paying them the salaries that they were earning when they were under the agencies. Another point that I thought my brother would talk about is how do we manage the NTBs in regional trade and continental trade? For example, recently we have these conflicts, we have this Ebola, we have bureaucracies, we have challenges with cross-border trade. For example, when you look at Mutukula and you look at the trucks that go across, they're only about 50 or so, or even less. Whereas Busia, you find almost 800 to 1,000 trucks that go across. So how do we make use of these cross-border posts that we have constructed through Trademark throughout this year? The whole year, Trademark aggressively constructed modern cross-border trade posts. But some of them are totally underutilized. I am in domestic tourism. I have a facility called Insulo Haven. I will invite all of you to come and celebrate. But as much as we talk about tourism roads, the infrastructure is still very poor. That is one. Two, what support do we have from tourism for tourism, and yet it's one of the leading industries that is generating revenue in this country? I happen to be on the board of directors of Fresh Handling. That is another point. And Fresh Handling deals with flowers. They grow flowers, and they are some of the key exporters. But they are suffering because they're trying to establish a cold storage facility. But wherever they go, our government institutions are asking for money. Yet this cold storage facility is supposed to generate revenue for our economy. So these are some of the key issues that I felt that we should take into consideration. Finally, or last but not least, when we look at the industrial growth, you realize that we already have 8,400 factories, from 1886. But when you look at the labor workforce in those industries, it's only 4.3%. Of course, COVID has hit recently. COVID has hit them. But two, because of digitalization, automation. All these new factories are highly automated. So what is my appeal? I'm glad you talked about skilling. Let us go for more aggressive skilling, especially amongst the youth, the women, so that they could also start their small businesses. Finally, digitalization is the key, the way to go now. We're all talking about fintech. Let us look at the taxes. They're too high. We are doing our businesses on the phone. Everybody who's seated here is managing this little thing. This is the power. This is the power for all of us. All of us. And we all have the power in our hands, but can we afford it? All the information is here. I support all the projects of government as I conclude, but I would like us to pronounce ourselves on some of these issues that affect the ordinary people, that affect our economy. I thank you so much, PS, for your speech, and I thank everybody for attending this event. I rest my case.
Thank you very much. Raised a number of issues.
There's one point, agriculture. Sorry, allow me just 1 second.
Okay, go on.
Agriculture, I really liked your textbook presentation. All those issues are so good, but practically what are you doing? Because you did not bring that out. You do not tell us whether you have distribution centers. You do not tell us what you're doing about irrigation. You do not tell us what you're doing about mechanization. You do not tell us whether you have data of the categories of farmers that you have under Ministry of Agriculture. I thank you. Banks, let me spare you.
And I'll say I'm also helping him to rationalize agencies and remove them. I know those guys are skilled and experienced enough. They will find jobs. We just want to save the budget and duplication and siloism. I hope I don't find the road to my home blocked. Dr. Francis Mwesije, Director, Economic and Research and Knowledge Management, Uganda Development Bank, where are you? Your few minutes begin now. And this week somebody wanted to give me some little money. Don't ask me for what. And he asked me for my bank account. I said, you person, do you live with us? My mobile money will receive that amount. And I can acknowledge in any other way that you want. I got my money and I bought some meat, which I've already eaten. You are talking about knowledge management. UDB, go on, please.
Thank you, Dr. Muhumuza. You've introduced me. I'm as Francis Mwesije, Chief Economist, but also Director for Economic Research and Knowledge Management at Uganda Development Bank. UDB is a national development finance institution that is charged with a responsibility of mandate of promoting socio-economic transformation through providing financial solutions. And when we talk of financial solutions, it includes debt and equity. But also, Mr. Moderator, I would like to note that we have non-financial solutions that we also offer, including business advisory, project preparation, and so forth. Again, I think it's been mentioned, the main challenge as to why most of our businesses do not access finance and credit, so to speak, is because they are not prepared. So we provide that form of support. I would really like to borrow from today's theme and what I take real as keywords. You've alluded to them, realizing sustainable, inclusive growth. I'll leave other keywords because they're also key and a number of speakers have alluded to them. And I really want to borrow these keywords to speak to what Uganda Development Bank is doing, and basically what government of Uganda is doing through Uganda Development Bank. As a bank and as a DFI, we have mapped different forms of exclusion, ranging from spatial, that is regional-wise, because if I really go back to UBOS poverty numbers, you realize that while we have about 20.4% poverty rate in the country, spatially there are significant variations. You'll have some sub-regions such as Karamoja and Acholi above 65% of the population in those sub-regions below the poverty line, and you'll find Kampala 1.3%, which is really way below the national average. So that's one form of, when we talk of inclusion, there is spatial inclusion. There's another form of exclusion, which is gender, and this has really highly been researched when you talk of youth, women, and so forth. And we have mapped that as another form of exclusion. We have another one that is based on the size of business, that SMEs, if you compare MSMEs, so to say, compared to large businesses, they really face different challenges that impede them from accessing finance. I really wanted to speak to those and talk about a few initiatives that the bank has put in place to reach out these different segments of our community. I'll start with the SMEs and gender. This year, Mr. Moderator, we launched a special programs which is aimed at enhancing access to financing by small businesses, largely SMEs and gender. These have lenient conditions, because we realize that in the mainstream lending, many of these, and PSST alluded to that the requirements of like the loan application processes and so forth, many small businesses could not benefit. So we deliberately started that special programs with clear, more lenient and targeted conditions for those small businesses. And I'm happy to note that as of end of October this year, the bank had approved 99 projects in that space worth 22 billion Uganda shillings. That is to really help bridge that gap. That is in addition to the mainstream lending that we've been offering. The second one that I've talked about, the spatial variations. We noted that even when you provide support, some regions do not really show up, especially in access to financing. So going forward, we've come up with regional and sub-regional targets in our planning, where we say, and as a bank, when we are planning, we set targets for every year. I'll give an example this year. We're targeting to disburse a minimum of 612 billion Uganda shilling to businesses in Uganda. Now we've added a target, a regional target. We said that for every money we disburse, these regions must take this percentage. And we deliberately look out for businesses, nurture them. Where if they are not prepared, we invoke these other interventions and solutions that we offer, such as business advisory, to prepare them and support them. And really what we want to address here is what we saw this year, that even when we saw resilience across Uganda, sub-regions such as Karamoja were suffering from food insecurity. In relation to that, we have a new way of doing, as I wrap up, a new approach that we are adopting, really not new because it's aligned to National Development Plan 3, the programmatic approach. We call it program-based financing. And here we want to blend the demand-driven approach that we've been using as a bank, where businesses show up, apply, you assess them. Now we want to start crafting. We go aligned again to a commodity-based approach that PSST talked about. You go design a program, well-aligned, pick a value chain. It could be commodity-based, area-based, and so forth. And then you take finances. But again, the advantage of this is to lock in other supporters and funders, civil society, private sector, other government agencies. Mr. Moderator, with those initiatives, we hope that we'll be able to reach out to those communities that need us more, but also those segments of the society to promote sustainable and inclusive. Lastly is on green financing. I won't go into details, but to note that the bank in 2020 established a green finance unit. We have put in place policies, guidelines, and initiatives, and we are launching a climate finance facility very soon. And this is to help us tap into those finances that PSST alluded to. I would like to end it here and submit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Remember, our theme was about stabilizing and strategies for stabilizing. One of the co-pilots in the cockpit is the DG. DG, you just can't leave us without us hearing what is happening in the cockpit. Quite often all you hear is put on your seat belts. We're about to land. DG, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Fred. There are a number of dignitaries here, so I'm not going to risk leaving out any. I'll just say all protocol is observed. Now, a very good evening to all of you. The theme for this discussion, organized by NTV Economic Summit Program, by the way, thank you very much. I want to join the Honorable Amelia Chembare for what you've done. This is really great. And I want to thank the PSST for the introductory remarks and all the panelists for the views that you have expressed. So let me begin by addressing the shocks. And I'm coming from the side of inflation. We've had very many shocks this year, but two of them are key, and they drove inflation. These were the shock that came out of the Russia-Ukraine and the supply side disruptions of the imported inputs, which have affected inflation. And then secondly, there was the climate-related shock that drove food crop inflation. Now, what are the key lessons that we learn from that? Because this is going to shape the agenda to address the issues of strategies for stabilizing the Ugandan economy. But before I go to discussing the lessons learned and the way forward, I want to make a correction, one thing. And I had it here today, and it's been going around, that why do we use demand management tools to address supply side shocks? Let me begin by assuring you that inflation began to increase as early as in December last year when the economy was reopened. Because when the economy was closed, the supply side did not respond as much as the demand side following the opening of the economy. So aggregate demand began to outstrip the supply side, and we began to see the prices increase. But come January 2022, what happened? When the education and the hospitality subsectors were opened, we saw an increase in the services sector inflation because of the education-related materials. But that was small. It was highly localized. And headline inflation was just 2.7% in January. Come February, Russia wakes up to invade Ukraine. What does it always do? They impose sanctions on the Russian oil. And Russia being, I think, the second largest exporter of oil, it impacted on the oil prices. And then we had the issues to do with Indonesia, Malaysia, with the crude palm oil, which affected the washing, the washing sector industry like soap, detergents, and what have you, including cooking oil. Now, what happens to inflation in February? Inflation increases from 2.7 in January to 3.2 in February. It creeps to 3.7 in March. It goes to 4.9 in April. All that time, Bank of Uganda was doing nothing. Then it hit 6.2 in May. So the question is, if Bank of Uganda was reacting to a supply side-led inflation, why did we wait from February to June to change the CBR? So that goes to allay the fears that we were reacting to a supply side-led inflation. Otherwise, we would have done so in March, April, and maybe May. But we then only changed the CBR in June because we realized that this highly localized inflation that was limited to soap, to cooking oil, to transport, had begun to spread across the entire consumer price basket. Even those items that were not affected by the supply side were now reacting to this isolated inflation. Take, for example, transport. Transport, because of the rising fuel prices, everything was affected by that. So monetary policy does not react to isolated price increases. It reacts to a generalized rise in price level. So when we saw that there was a generalized rise in price level, we then adjusted monetary policy by raising the CBR from 6.5% that had prevailed for over 1 year to 7.5 in June. And because these prices continue to rise, we then adjusted the CBR to where it's right now at 10%. So what are the key takeaways from here that are related to shocks? One, the climate change, which caused the food crop prices to increase. I don't have the numbers for November, but I recall for October, inflation, food crop inflation went up to about 25.6. And if I'm not mistaken, for November, I think it's 27, I stand be corrected. Food crop inflation is still going up. This is climate related. And then there's one that is linked to exchange rates. Because of the nature of our foreign exchange markets, we saw, first of all, a significant presence of offshore players participating in our domestic securities market. Why did they increase significantly? Because the advanced central banks of the advanced economies had lowered their interest rates to near zero, and the return in investing in Uganda government securities was much higher, so they all flooded here. Now, when they normalized the interest rate following the rise of inflation in their country, these guys fled. We lost over $500 million as a result of these guys fleeing. And because of that, they were exerting pressure on the exchange rate. So the exchange rate depreciated from 3,550 to about 3,800, nearly touching 3,900. Now, what did we do? We had to tighten monetary policy significantly, remove liquidity from the system. And I sympathize with the banks, there's no liquidity. But that has helped in stabilizing the exchange rate. Today, as I talk, the currency, this at 3:30 today, was trading at 3,735 buying and 3,745 selling, from nearly 3,900. Inflation has kind of like stabilized. We think it's now maybe getting to plateau. And we think that this is likely to begin coming down in early 2023, unless there is a very big shock that will disorganize. But our projection that inflation is going to go on a downward trend. So that's what we did. But we cannot do this if we don't sustainably address the causes of inflation, and that is climate change, and then deepening our foreign exchange market so that the likes of these portfolio players who are playing about with the exchange rate, their role, their contribution to the FX market gets limited. So this is where we have the interventions. So what are we doing now as a central bank? One, we want to support the idea of preserving the environment. And that's why I want to agree with a colleague from Standard Chartered Bank that Bank of Uganda is institutionalizing environmental, social sustainability, and governance standards, not only in Bank of Uganda, but across the entire financial sector. Because we believe that the supervised financial institutions cannot make profits sustainably if the environment and the population, the livelihood of the population is not sustained. They can only make profits if the environment and the livelihood of the people are sustained. So we are now going to institutionalize ESG across the the banking sector. So environment preservation is key. If we can do what the PSSC talked about of the irrigation, people getting out of the swamps so that we can increase on the water catchment areas. We can then deal with the food crop inflation, which has really bedeviled us for some time. And then the aspect of value addition. Value addition is very, very critical if we are going to deepen our foreign exchange market. What does value addition do? First of all, it increases the production of the inputs. It could be agriculture, it could be anything. And then once you add value to it, you are likely to end up with import substitution and export promotion. Import substitution together with export promotion increases the availability of foreign currency in the local market here. And if we can grow that base, then the capacity of the offshores to trigger changes in our exchange rate is going to be limited. So that's why it's very important that we need to support the government in the value addition agenda. And this is why I'm calling upon the private sector to do whatever it takes to increase production and productivity so as to achieve this agenda. And also, some supply side disruptions that were created by locks, by issues in Malaysia, Indonesia, if we can really increase production and value addition here, then we would minimize the impact of these things here. For example, the crude palm oil, all right? Kalangala, I think by now should be producing sufficient crude palm oil. We wouldn't have to go through all this. So issue is increased production and productivity to sustain value addition will bring stability into our foreign exchange market so that these, the portfolio players' influence on our exchange rate reduces. So, therefore, the installation of the ESG agenda is very important. Environment, 70% of Ugandans live in the rural areas and they rely on agriculture. They rely on agriculture. So if we can secure the environment through climate mitigation, climate risk mitigation, we are securing the livelihoods of these people. And then, if we can also ensure that the linkage between financial institutions and the bottom of the pyramid is created, then we are going to ensure the social sustainability of the population out there. And how can we do this? We can do this through what we call the product inclusion, using financial technology. Today we have telecoms that are partnering with banks. For example, MTN is partnering with NCBA for Momo Cash. These guys can retail loans into the bottom of the pyramid. They can retail savings from the bottom of the pyramid for, with these financial institutions, so that we have a linkage that's taking place between the big firms and the bottom of the pyramid through these fintechs. Airtel, through the Wowole, is working with KCB and the Housing Finance Bank to offer similar savings and loans. You have the insurance facilities. IO Insurance is partnering with MTN. And also we have savings and investment schemes. Zeno Investments, again, is partnering with MTN. So how can we have more of this so that we can reach the bottom of the pyramid? And once these guys can begin accessing microloans, we are talking about improving the livelihoods of the guys who are at the bottom of the pyramid. And that is what is going to create sustainability for these guys and also increasing resilience to shocks that these guys face through even the insurance facilities, through securing the environment for them. But importantly, without addressing the governance issues at the supervised financial institution level, all this is not possible. So we are going to have a conversation with the supervised financial institutions that how can you change a business model? How can we define business success? And the conversation is going to revolve around the fact that it's no longer about creating value for the shareholders of the supervised financial institution, but it's about creating value for the communities in which you live. That is what is going to create financial sustainability, environmental sustainability, and social sustainability. So it is about promoting the sustainability of the planet through environment, of the people through improving the livelihoods of these people, and also their profits through making sure that they have sustainability finance. So the whole agenda of governance is going to be restructured so that we move from shareholders to community value creation. And I want to commend the UBA. Mr. Kaketo talked here about the regional export facility. This is a facility that is going to look at the whole value chain financing of the exports, right from the production to value addition. So this is the kind of concept that we're trying to promote, because this is what is sustainable. So going forward, that is what we want to do. So let me try to sum it up by addressing this issue of climate change. Climate change is a serious threat to growth, people, and the assets, natural and man-made. And we need to develop appropriate adaptation and mitigation policies, which are critical for growth stabilization, as well as sustainability and inclusiveness, given the nature of economic activities that climate supports, particularly for the vulnerable. The increase in the frequency and the occurrence and the impact, the destruction that the climate change is bringing. Look at Bududa, look at Kasese, look at Karamoja. These are extreme ends of climate change, from floods to droughts. It's affecting the lives of the people. So it therefore makes imperative to treat climate change as a major national threat. And I'm glad that the PSST has talked about it. And it requires a holistic and a well-coordinated policy response. So some of the key actions that we need to consider here are to ramp up the capacity, to design and implement water catchment projects and wetland protection, expanding forest coverage, developing social protection and insurance schemes that provide cover against loss, like I've already mentioned. But importantly, for the financial sector, we are going to identify climate risk indicators to assess the impact of climate changes on the financial sector, so that we can come up with appropriate policies to mitigate this on the balance sheets of the central bank. Today, the oil and the gas sector is attracting significant financing from the financial sector, but this is carbon emitting. So we're going to ask commercial banks that you have lent to this oil and gas sector. Can we see what you have lent to mitigate carbon emission up there, so that we see how we can end up with a net zero carbon emission policy? And we're going to have this conversation that the balance sheet should be transparent. They should reflect all this so that we can have a conversation. And that's one way that we are going. So if you're going to support tree planting, you're going to support green financing, this is all going to be important. And then, of course, as we talk about technology, there are also risks that come with this technology. Cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a real threat to financial inclusion. And I don't need to repeat the example that we have seen in the recent past and about a year and a half ago. So we're having serious discussions with the supervised financial institutions, how to deal with this cybersecurity. How do we enhance the risk mitigation mechanism for cybersecurity? So as I conclude, permit me to emphasize that sustainable and inclusive growth can be elusive even with resolute and courageous actions of policymakers, if civil society and the private sector are not equally courageous to play their roles. So I'm asking the civil society, I'm asking the private sector to be much more courageous. How can we advocate for good governance? How can we advocate for increased productivity? How can we advocate for increased production? Now, for the major thing that's affecting the private sector, which is the high lending rates, the PSSC has addressed most of those issues. But I hasten to mention that the absence of long-term financing is the major cause today, because what the available financing from the commercial bank is really meant to address working capital, not long-term financing. So you cannot be using short-term liabilities to finance long-term assets. This is what the whole mismatch is. So my challenge is to UDB. My challenge is to the development financial institutions. How can we support these industries that are export-oriented, that have long gestation periods, that require patient capital? How do we support them? Rather than them coming to commercial banks to try to look for long-term financing, that becomes very, very expensive. So we need to address that. So I will end with this quote by saying that, as T.S. Eliot said, quote, "Only those who can risk going too far can possibly find out how far one can go," unquote. I therefore challenge all of us in the policy-making space to take the risk of going too far, and the private sector and civil society to do the same as we aim to achieve sustainable and inclusive growth of our economy. I thank you so much for your attention, and God bless.
Thank you, DG. A lot of your messages are music to my ears, speaking to the expanded mission of the central bank. When the central bank talks about climate change, that wasn't the language of central banks, but they have added that thing of socio-economic transformation. I don't know whether you have seen that mission of the central bank. That's a new addition, that they're not just stabilizing things, they also want to speak to socio-economic transformation, but also protecting, going bottom of the pyramid. Thank you, DJ. I'm yet to receive many of these calls. You remember now MTN is doing this. We used to receive those before you reined in these mobile money lending things. So as you go bottom of the pyramid, security of those monies, these are interventions that they might be small, but more cash, those people need to be protected. You don't want Bafere to take your money. So we want to really appreciate all those interventions and efforts that have been done. We want to be closing to our live audience out there, but the MD is here, and the MD is saying the PSST needs to say something before we close. So MTN, please, you'll sort out yourselves with the MD. Mr. PSST, and then I'll come back to my panel to give their closing remarks of what are their takeaways. I'm still with you, my panelists. I'm not letting you go.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muhumuza. Thank you very much, everybody who has spoken. The feedback is very well heard, actually listened to. And I know I'm standing now between you and the World Cup, so I have to be very careful. I'm going to be very precise because most of the things which people have spoken right from the panel to the various interventions, they were really not questions, but things which they are bringing to our attention to ensure that as we do policy, we take care of them. I will say all of these proposals that are practical will be adopted. Those that are not will not. And right from the panel, I've heard Sarah Birete, my good friend there, speaking about her lovely topic these days, debt. I've taken note of it, and reinforced by the senior there, His Excellency Kaboyo. These are their excellencies. The debt I wanted to comment on it briefly. We actually publish regular reports on the debt position of Uganda. We publish what we call annual reports every single year since 2015. We have been publishing a report on the following: public debt, guarantees, and other financial liabilities and grants. The latest one was published in March of this year, a 154-page document. But when I hear that people saying they don't have enough information about debt, these are on the website of Ministry of Finance, and they are in libraries of public institutions, including Parliament, universities, and at our library at the ministry. And they are often also